Marshall Peak, Chapter 5964, The Second World. Mu's house was located on the periphery of Dawn City. When the world started repelling Yang Kai and the worlds will form the destructive storm, Mu detected something and looked in the black ink abyss direction. Has he succeeded? It was quicker than she had expected. It seemed that her several million years of waiting were worth it, for Yang Kai might be able to achieve the goal she had left behind. Presently, little 11th was asleep on her lap. As though having a nightmare, he had been trembling for a while as a myriad of expressions came over him. Sometimes, he was full of murderous intent, and sometimes, he appeared furious. His figure was already soaked in sweat. Just then, a clap of thunder sounded. Little 11th awakened in shock and looked dazedly at Mu, then, he pouted and started crying. Did you have a nightmare? Mu asked softly. Little 11th nodded repeatedly. In the dream, I saw you abandoning me, and you were getting further away from me. Mu placated him with a smile. It's just a dream. Little 11th sniffled and snuggled up to Mu. He held the woman's thighs tightly and said childishly, You mustn't abandon me, sixth sister. I'll have no one I can call family anymore. Mu patted his back. Don't worry. I'll never abandon you, and I'll always keep you company. Of course, when you become an adult one day, perhaps you'll find me annoying and run away. That will never happen. Little 11th frowned as he realized something was off. He then said, I think I've fallen ill, sixth sister. I'm feeling unwell. You'll feel better after some sleep. Little 11th replied and found a comfortable position before dozing off. As Yang Kai traversed the void, he could feel a drawing force pointing out the direction for him. The drawing force wasn't the repulsive force from the primordial world, instead, it was a force that came from the space-time river itself. He instantly realized that it was something left behind by Mu. After he refined the profound source gate in the primordial world and sealed one piece of Mu's source, he had to leave for the next world. He was in a hurry. Undoubtedly, Mu's space-time river was powerful, and the flow of time in these universe worlds was different from that of the outside world. However, the longer he stayed here, the more likely an accident would happen outside. It seems I have to hurry up. Then, he emptied his mind and soon found a closed door in his knowledge sea. It was the profound source gate that he had refined at the bottom of the black ink abyss. He didn't expect the gate to enter his knowledge sea after he refined it, however, after giving it some thought, he realized it wasn't surprising that he could keep it in his knowledge sea. The profound source gate was a treasure born alongside the heavens and earth, after all. It would be awkward if he had to carry the gate and move around. He already had the soul-warming lotus in his knowledge sea, and now there was the profound source gate. The sight was somewhat awkward. On the seven-colored island, Fong Tian Ci and Thunder Shadow exchanged glances with helpless expressions. This couldn't be helped. The moment the profound source gate abruptly appeared in the knowledge sea, Yen Peng became agitated. As his entire figure was engulfed in a cold aura, he soon went mad. The eerie gate seemed able to elicit the darkness in human nature. Yen Peng originally came from the Black Ink cult, so he couldn't be considered a good and kind person. Since he had done so many terrible things in life, it was only natural that he had a vast dark side in his heart. After his body was destroyed by Yang Kai, his soul avatar was trapped in the latter's knowledge sea. He had been cooperative and provided a lot of useful information, and Yang Kai didn't intend to kill him anyway, so letting him stay in the knowledge sea was just a minor matter. Nevertheless, after his dark side was amplified by the profound source gate, he lost his sanity. Left with no choice, Fong Tian Ci and Thunder Shadow could only destroy his soul avatar. Certainly, they weren't feeling good about the whole affair. They finally had a new neighbor to talk to, but they hadn't lived long. That was why they felt helpless. At that moment, Fong Tian Ci and Thunder Shadow stood on the seven-colored island in silence and refrained from looking at the profound source gate. After they took a look at the gate earlier, they realized some horrible memories from the past sprang back into their minds, but the effect could be negated by ignoring the gate. Meanwhile, once Yang Kai left the primordial world, he glanced back and realized it was nowhere to be seen. He only saw some grains of sand that moved with the flow of the river. This reminded him of what he saw in the depths of the infinite river inside the universe furnace back then. There were similar grains of sand at the bottom of the infinite river as well, however, that wasn't sand. Each grain was a universe world. After the grains of sand were spurted from the universe furnace, they would reveal their true form. Every grain of sand was equivalent to a universe world. That was the wonder of chaos evolving into the 10,000 grand Daos. The drawing force intensified as Yang Kai traversed the space-time river and soon approached another grain of sand. That was the second world he had to enter. Without hesitation, Yang Kai adjusted his direction and plunged straight into the world. Soon, the aura of a universe world came right at his face. Just like what happened when he entered the primordial world previously, he abruptly appeared in a universe world, after which his figure plummeted. Since he had some experience now, he immediately examined his cultivation. He was relieved that even though his cultivation had been suppressed greatly, he was still in the immortal ascension boundary. Hurriedly, he circulated his power and stabilized himself mid-air. As he looked around, he realized it was a barren land with no one around. Moreover, he found the world strange as it was filled with a primitive aura. He felt as if he had barged into the river of time and returned to an ancient era. Wu Kuang, can you detect Mu's whereabouts? Yang Kai asked. Previously in the primordial world, it was thanks to Wu Kuang that they managed to find Mu. Although he was only a thread of consciousness, Wu Kuang was still connected to his true body. Furthermore, he was in charge of the primordial heaven source grand restriction where the spacetime river was hidden, therefore, if Mu wanted to give them any directives, she had to do it through Wu Kuang. However, the moment Yang Kai finished his words, he arched his brow, for he had already detected something. He turned to look in a particular direction and put on a helpless smile. I guess I've been overly worried. Since Mu wanted Yang Kai to move around different universe worlds to suppress and seal Mu's source pieces, she was naturally well prepared. In the primordial world, Mu must have left a mark on him, therefore, the moment he arrived in this world, he immediately detected something in a particular direction. It must be over there. He then charged towards that place. In the meantime, a figure was seated with her legs crossed in the wilderness. She had been waiting there for countless years, and she had no idea how much longer she would have to wait. She wasn't even certain if all the waiting would matter. All the same, even though innumerable years had passed, she had never forgotten about her goal. She was located in a mountain valley that was surrounded by 8 mountains. All these mountains were magnificent and connected. In the mountain valley, there was an abstruse grand array. In the middle of the grand array, there was a dark rock that exuded an evil aura. The grand array, and even the mountains themselves seemed to be suppressing the dark rock. With the help of the mountain range and the grand array, this place was where the entire universe world's power was gathered. Unlike Mu in Dawn City, this woman was undoubtedly more haggard, as though she hadn't gotten any rest for a very long time. The moment Yang Kai barged into this independent world, she opened her eyes and lifted her sword from her lap. The weapon then turned into a ray of light and shot off into the distance. Following that, a beastly growl was heard from behind her. A huge ancient beast collapsed to the ground, and its blood dyed the ground red. The mountain valley was covered with huge skeletons, and every one of them belonged to an ancient beast. After so many years, she had lost count of how many ancient beasts she had killed. The sword returned and quietly landed in front of her without a drop of blood on it. Then, she slowly turned to look in a different direction. Her figure was stiff, as though she hadn't moved like this for a long time. This simple movement represented several 100,000 years of waiting. She put on a smile, for she could feel that all the waiting was finally worth it. In the distance, a figure was rushing towards her. The figure had a bit of her aura on him. It was thanks to the resonance between the shadows which allowed the newcomer to identify the direction he should head towards. He landed on the ground and exchanged glances with the woman. As young Kai looked at how haggard the shadow appeared, he couldn't help feeling heartbroken. Feeling a lump in his throat, he was unable to speak for a moment. A while later, he saluted the woman and said, "Junior Yang Kai greets Senior." Mu replied with a smile, "No need for formalities. You must have met me before." In response, Yang Kai nodded. Mu went on to say, "Then, you should know why you're here." While Yang Kai looked at the dark rock, Mu continued, "There are no humans in this world, only some ancient beasts that roam around. As such, you don't have to deal with any schemes or plots. Just move the dark rock away and use the profound source gate to suppress it." In the primordial world, it took Yang Kai a lot of effort to refine the profound source gate and suppress Mo's source piece, so much to his surprise, his task in this independent world was rather simple. As though seeing through his thoughts, Mu explained with a smile, "Every universe world is different. Perhaps you'll come across similar situations again, but there will also be times when you have to work hard to achieve your goals. Go ahead, I've been waiting for far too long." "Yes," Yang Kai replied respectfully. He knew that the task was simple because of Mu's efforts. He walked up to the dark rock and pushed it away. There was a dark pit on the ground, and the howls of wind could be heard coming from it. Following that, a cold aura was approaching rapidly, as though it was coming from the depths beneath the ground. Yang Kai raised his hands before pressing them down at the pit and shouting, "Open." A mysterious gate appeared above the pit, and with an injection of Yang Kai's strength, a portal opened up. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5965, See you soon. A horrifying power was felt surging inside the pit. The howls of wind were like its growls as it kept crashing into the profound source gate. The source piece, which had been suppressed and sealed here for a long time, must have realized that something was off, so it was trying to resist. Nevertheless, its efforts were futile. If it was the complete source, the gate wouldn't have been a threat to it, but it was only a small piece. The profound source gate's suppressive power spread. At the same time, a powerful drawing force was felt coming from behind the gate. After the source piece was lured out, it lost the power to resist and disappeared into the gap. The gate closed once again, after which Yang Kai kept it inside his knowledge sea. This time, it didn't take him much effort to suppress and seal Mo's source piece, but he knew it was all thanks to Mu. Just by looking at the skeletons in the valley, he knew that the woman must have waited here for countless years and killed all the ancient beasts that coveted black ink strength. If not for Mu's efforts, Yang Kai would have been attacked by ancient beasts corrupted by black ink strength the moment he arrived in this world, making his situation quite perilous. As Mu watched the source getting sealed, she finally appeared relieved. She got to her feet slowly. As Yang Kai looked at her in puzzlement, she extended her hand and pressed it against the man's chest. After their eyes met, Mu said, "I've completed my task, so I'll leave the rest to you, Junior. The human race's future hinges on you, so you must do your best to not fail this mission." As she spoke, her figure faded rapidly. It was as though she was about to disappear from this world. As that happened, Yang Kai could feel a warm stream entering his body through the woman's palm. "Senior," with a conflicted expression, Yang Kai had no idea what to say. "This is the price I have to pay for sending you away," Mu replied with a smile. Gradually, her figure was gone. As her power engulfed Yang Kai, he shot into the sky and turned into a ray of light. A crack appeared in the sky just then. The ray of light passed through it and disappeared. The familiar drawing force appeared again and led Yang Kai to the next world. He pressed his hand against his chest as his emotions undulated in his heart. Unlike the primordial world, the second world was one where only ancient beasts existed. He didn't do much as he only summoned the profound source gate and sealed Mo's source piece. Mu had cleared all the danger and obstacles for him. It was the result of countless years of perseverance. The entire time, Yang Kai had only briefly talked to Mu. There was no doubt she was a kind-hearted person. She devised this plan millions of years ago and let her shadows stay in different universe worlds to carry it out. She had been on her own all this time, waiting for a future that might not even come. In the end, she didn't even make any demands or requests, she simply told Yang Kai to do his best and try not to fail. Even so, he didn't give her a definitive reply. He couldn't help but blame himself. Mu had been doing all this selflessly, and she didn't need anyone to thank her. Nevertheless, Yang Kai could give her hope. While he was lost in his thoughts, the aura of the third world came right at his face. As usual, he followed the faint guidance and successfully found Mu, who had been waiting in a desolate place for countless years. Before Mu could say anything, Yang Kai muttered, "Senior, all the darkness will be dispelled by the light one day. The human race will have a bright future. All your contributions and efforts over the eons will be worth it." Mu stared fixedly at him with her mouth slightly open. With a confident expression, Yang Kai flashed a smile at her. Mu put on a smile as well. In just a short time, she understood everything and nodded, "Good." She turned around and pointed in a particular direction. "Mo's source piece is over there. Go ahead." "Yes." Yang Kai cupped his fist and strode towards the place. He soon sealed the source piece and returned. Mu walked up to him and pressed her hand against his chest before her figure faded. Yang Kai kept all the sorrow to himself and put on a bright smile. "I'll see you soon, senior." At the last moment, Mu flashed a smile at him, "See you soon." The next instant, Yang Kai shot into the sky. As he moved around different universe worlds, he made use of the profound source gate's power and sealed the pieces of Mo's source. Every time Yang Kai arrived in a new world, he would immediately say the same thing to Mu, who would give him the same response. As they met and parted ways repeatedly, it was like a never-ending cycle. In general, things went smoothly. In most of the worlds, Mu had cleared all the obstacles for him, so he just had to find her shadow and summon the profound source gate to seal Mo's source piece. In truth, in the primordial world, if not for the fact that Mu had to keep Little 11th by her side, she could have taken control of the profound source gate as well. However, due to Little 11th, Mu in the primordial world couldn't go near the profound source gate. After all, Mo's source piece had been suppressed behind the gate. An accident might happen if Little 11th approached the gate. Mo's source gave birth to the Black Ink cult. As such, Mu had to establish the light spirit religion to oppose it. In that independent world, there wasn't much help that Mu could provide in terms of aid. Moreover, the Black Ink cult had developed rapidly. As such, it took Yang Kai quite some effort before he settled everything in the primordial world. Nevertheless, things wouldn't always go smoothly. When Yang Kai entered the 60th universe world, he realized that something was off. The entire world was filled with black ink strength. All the living creatures in this world had been corrupted by black ink strength and turned into black ink disciples. When Yang Kai followed the guidance and found Mu, she was covered in blood while running for her life. This couldn't be helped, as everyone in that world was hunting her down. Yang Kai had no idea how long the situation had persisted, but when he found her, she was in a terrible state. After saving Mu from the Black Ink disciples, Yang Kai found a quiet place and stopped in his tracks. He asked, "What's going on, senior?" Mu explained, "Something went wrong with the sealing location. Too much of Mo's source strength leaked out and it has affected far too many beings. They shattered the seal and let Mo's source piece break free." Upon hearing her explanation, Yang Kai finally realized why this world was filled with black ink strength. Mo's source piece had broken free from its shackles. The darkness in the humans of this world could no longer be hidden in front of black ink strength. Everyone in this world had been affected and turned into black ink disciples. "Do you know where the source piece is, senior?" Yang Kai asked. Realizing his intention, Mu shook her head, "There's no point looking for it. Since you've started sealing Mo's source piece, speed is essential. Give up on this world and head to the next one. Saying so, she tried to get to her feet, but due to her injuries, she was unable to do so. Yang Kai hurriedly squatted in front of her. Mu pressed her hand against his chest. They could hear the sounds of footsteps as many living creatures were rapidly approaching them. Remember, if there's a similar situation in any world, abandon it at once. There's no point trying to achieve your goal every time because you won't be able to seal all the pieces of its source regardless. Yang Kai nodded in response. Back in the primordial world, Mu's first shadow told him that she had divided Mo's source into 3,000 pieces. Every time Yang Kai sealed a piece of its source, Mo would be alerted. When it reached a certain point, Mo would awaken and retrieve all the remaining source pieces. Therefore, Yang Kai couldn't seal all 3,000 pieces. In that case, it would be wiser to give up on this world and head to the next one where it would be easier to seal the source piece. I understand. Yang Kai nodded. Also, my shadows might not be alive in all the universe worlds. You might enter a world where I'm not around, but you don't have to worry. The previous shadows had left behind enough power for you, so you can leave for the next world anytime you want. Yang Kai nodded again. The footsteps were getting closer as they felt flaring energy fluctuations. The black ink disciples around them were running out of patience as they were ready to make a move. Mu's figure vanished into thin air, after which Yang Kai shot into the sky, leaving the black ink disciples growling on the ground. He set off on his journey and traversed the space-time river again. He repeatedly entered different worlds and sealed the pieces of the source. 100, 200, 300, Yang Kai kept count in his mind. As the number of the pieces he sealed increased, he could feel the situation worsening. Every time he sealed a piece of Mo's source, Mo would be disturbed. When it finally realized the severity of the matter, it would awaken. Yang Kai had no idea what the limit was, but he knew he was getting closer to it. What made him feel helpless was that there were now more and more worlds with difficult situations. The first time he came across a problem was when he reached the 60th world. The second time was after he sealed the 100th piece, and the third time was around the 130th piece. The intervals were getting shorter. The universe worlds within Mu's space-time river all had different world principles, therefore, the strengths of the living creatures in these worlds varied greatly. However, her guidance seemed to be leading Yang Kai from the weakest to the strongest ones. Initially, the limit of the martial Tao in the universe worlds was only the immortal ascension boundary, but gradually, it became the transcendent realm, then the saint realm, the saint king realm, the Tao source realm, and eventually the emperor realm. As the living creatures in those worlds became stronger, it became more difficult for Yang Kai to achieve his goal. After all, Mu's shadow was on her own in most worlds. The powerful creatures were naturally attracted to Mo's source strength, and once too many of them gathered together, even Mu's shadow couldn't stop them. Yang Kai followed Mu's advice. Every time he came across a fallen world, he would give up on it at once. Nevertheless, he would always look for Mu and integrate her last bit of power into his body. He wasn't after Mu's power, he just wanted to bring as much of her away as possible. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5966, Rescuing the Suppressing Black Ink Army. As Yang Kai was swimming through Mu's space-time river, a great battle had erupted outside the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction. After dealing with the Black Ink Clan reinforcement army, Yang Kai rushed ahead to investigate the situation at the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction while the Crusade force was a step behind since they had to clean up the aftermath as well as rest and recover. But it was only a few days before the Crusade force set off as well. Through the space arrays set up by the Void Guard, the army was able to rapidly advance and soon reached the edge of the spiritless land. This was where the last universe temple was located. Something unexpected had happened at the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction a few years back. The suppressing Black Ink army was swallowed up into the Grand Restriction and a large number of Black Ink clansmen poured out from the opening. The Void Guard could not set up a space array directly outside the Grand Restriction as it would simply be courting death. At the edge of the spiritless land, the army regrouped and a few days later, it set sail towards the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction. After a month, the army arrived at the outer perimeter of the Grand Restriction, where a large battle immediately broke out. This was a war launched with all the forces the human race possessed, with millions of human soldiers fighting while being led over by 39th Order Masters. Originally, there were far fewer 9th Order Masters on the human race side. Including Yang Kai, there were 10 of them before the attack on the No-Return Pass. However, the successful battle at the No-Return Pass provided a breakthrough opportunity for many rising stars, many of whom succeeded in advancing. 23 people attempted to break through, and the outcome was that 3 failed while 20 succeeded. As a result, the 9th Order Masters reached the 30 mark. Afterwards, more Masters broke through to the 9th Order as well. Now, there were more than 39th Order Masters in the Crusade force. Thousands of years ago, through a series of devastating losses, culminating in the Barren Territory War, the veteran 9th Order Masters were decimated until only Xiao Xiao and Wu Qin remained. After several thousand bitter years passed though, the human race had finally restored some of its foundation. More than 39th Order Masters, millions of soldiers, and powerful warships filled the battlefield. The power of the entire human race had gathered here today. However, the Black Ink clan was not to be underestimated either. The primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction had been around for millions of years. During these years, Black Ink's strength increased constantly, but it had reached a limit. Even if it kept increasing, it would be difficult to break through the Grand Restriction. Thus, much of the Black Ink strength accumulated had been used to create more Black Ink clansmen. One could say that within the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction, the Black Ink clan's forces had already accumulated to a terrifying number. If Mu had not brought out her hidden hand to put Mo to sleep back then, the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction would most likely have been destroyed and the Black Ink clan could have swept over the entire universe. It was Mu who gave the human race a final chance, allowing them to create the current situation. Currently, the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction was still under Wuquang's control. Even though the opening in the Grand Restriction had expanded significantly, it still had a limit, which restricted the speed of the Black Ink clansmen's escape. Furthermore, royal lords still found it incredibly difficult to pass through. If they forced their way out, it would severely damage their foundation, which had been proven by past attempts. When the Crusade force arrived at the Grand Restriction, a large army of Black Ink clansmen had already gathered outside, numbering over 100 million. Though there were no royal lords among them, there were still plenty of pseudo-royal lords. Compared with the immense Black Ink clan army, the human race army appeared minuscule. When the war broke out, the human race's forces were far inferior in number to the Black Ink clan. However, relying on the experienced army which had survived through countless battles, they coordinated with each other and made use of all their advantages to fight. Even if they could not gain the upper hand, they still wouldn't appear weak in front of their enemies. From afar, the human race army looked like a small snake slithering agilely around a giant python, constantly tearing at the latter's body. The entire void was filled with the corpses of the Black Ink clansmen, and Black Ink strength released from them had condensed together to form massive Black Ink clouds. Each 9th Order Master was going all out to slaughter the pseudo-royal lords. Even the 8th Order Masters were unwilling to appear weak. Together, they got into battle formations and charged fearlessly at their enemies. At the Grand Restriction's opening, the Black Ink clansmen kept pouring out to reinforce their army. However, what shocked them all was how the speed of their reinforcements couldn't keep up with the speed of the slaughter. The number of Black Ink clansmen gathered outside the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction was still steadily decreasing. The morale of the human race army grew higher and higher. However, Mi Jingluan, who was standing by at the command center of the human race army, did not show any joy on his face. He knew that this was only the beginning of the war. So far, he had not seen any royal lords make a move yet, and through his communication with Wuquang, he also knew of Yang Kai's whereabouts and why the royal lords were unable to leave the Grand Restriction. Currently, he was facing a dilemma. Even though the suppressing Black Ink army was trapped in the Grand Restriction and they were safe for the time being with Wu Kuang's help, countless royal lords were searching for the suppressing Black Ink army's whereabouts within the Grand Restriction. Once the suppressing Black Ink army's tracks got exposed, their survival chances inside the Grand Restriction would become null. Wu Kuang had the ability to send the suppressing Black Ink army out of the Grand Restriction, but he had not done so before because of the gathered Black Ink clan army. Even if he were to send them out, it would be like sending a flock of lambs to a tiger's den. Instead, it was better to let the suppressing Black Ink army to continue hiding inside the Grand Restriction where he could look after them. However, now that the Crusade force had arrived, the suppressing Black Ink army had an escape route. As long as they could coordinate with the Crusade force, sending them out of the Grand Restriction shouldn't be an issue. But doing so would create another problem. The opening in the Grand Restriction had been torn numerous times already, and each time, it caused irreparable damage to the Grand Restriction. In order to send the suppressing Black Ink army out, Wu Kuang would have to widen the gap in the Grand Restriction wider. Currently, the opening in the Grand Restriction could only allow Black Ink clansmen weaker than royal lords to pass through. If a royal lord were to force their way out, it would severely damage their strength, which was why they were all still hiding within the Grand Restriction. If the opening was expanded, then the royal lords might be able to enter and leave the Grand Restriction freely. There were a large number of royal lords within the Grand Restriction, and if they joined the battlefield, the pressure that the Crusade force would have to bear would be far more than what they were facing now, which meant that the intensity of the battle would also shoot straight up. This was the dilemma that Mi Jingluan was currently facing. The suppressing Black Ink army was in danger, but the cost of saving them was allowing royal lords to join the battlefield. However, an answer had already appeared in his heart. It was imperative that they save the suppressing Black Ink army. Without even mentioning that the suppressing Black Ink army was composed of elites from the human race who had guarded the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction for over 2000, there was also divine dragon Fu Guang among them. Many of Yang Kai's family members also belonged to the suppressing Black Ink army. For all these reasons, Mi Jingluan could not simply abandon them. If those who made great contributions were left to die, it would devastate the morale of the other soldiers. Of course, this was not the main reason. From another perspective, eliminating the Black Ink clan here would not directly affect the outcome of the war. No matter how many pseudo-royal lords they killed, or how many Black Ink clansmen were slaughtered, it would only weaken the Black Ink clan's strength but not shake their foundation. No one knew how many Black Ink clansmen were still hiding within the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction, not even Wu Kuang. The royal lords within the Grand Restriction were something that they would have to face sooner or later. While Wu Kuang still had control over the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction, it would be better to let out some royal lords and kill them, rather than allowing all of them to rush out all at once when the Grand Restriction inevitably collapsed. Based on the current situation, tearing open another opening in the Grand Restriction and allowing the royal lords to pass through was beneficial for them as it could alleviate some of the pressure in advance. Therefore, it was both morally and tactically sound to say that saving the suppressing Black Ink army was a necessary move. What was more, the human race still had some cards up their sleeves. They hadn't revealed all of their strength yet. With an idea in mind, Mi Jingluan and Wu Kuang discussed with each other and soon agreed on a plan. The movement of the human race army quickly changed. Originally, the army of millions remained mobile, using superior mobility to harass the Black Ink clan army since they were outnumbered by them. If they wanted to kill more enemies, they had to preserve their strength as much as possible. But now, the human race army suddenly gathered all their mass and recklessly charged towards the opening in the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction. The human masters took up position on the outer periphery, forming a defensive shield around the troops while the slightly weaker soldiers gathered at the center, enhancing the army's strength. The Black Ink clan had not in any way expected that the humans would suddenly change their strategy. Since the Black Ink clan's deployment was not as tight as their opponents, the human race army easily rammed through their lines and breached their defenses. The human race army advanced straight through the gaps, paving multiple paths towards the Grand Restriction's opening using the blood and remains of the Black Ink clansmen. Just as the Crusade force approached the opening, the Grand Restriction suddenly expanded like the mouth of a ferocious beast and spat out the suppressing Black Ink fortress. The timing was perfect. This success had to be credited to Wuquang's guidance. Without him, the suppressing Black Ink army would never be able to break out of the Grand Restriction at such an apt time. If they had done it too early, they would have been surrounded by the Black Ink clan army. Too late, and the human race army would have suffered heavy losses. The human race army coalesced into a single force and did not pause for even a moment. When the suppressing Black Ink army in control of the suppressing Black Ink fortress merged with the rest, they broke through the encirclement of the Black Ink clan and flew out. It was only once they reached a suitable distance that they reorganized their formations. The first clash between the human race army and Black Ink clan army ended with a resounding victory for the humans, but everyone knew that this was just the beginning. There was no time to rest on this battlefield. Once the fighting began, one should only seek to rest in death. Powerful auras emerged from the opening in the Grand Restriction soon after, and the vague silhouettes of many figures could be seen moving restlessly through the dark opening. Royal Lords. The faces of all the masters of the human race became solemn since the number of figures visible was not by any means small. During their first crusade, the Black Ink clan had deployed some 300 royal lords in total, which was 3 times the number of Ninth Order masters at the time. Though not so many royal lords were gathered at the opening at this moment, there were at least 40 of them. Moreover, this was just the beginning. There would definitely be more royal lords who received the news and rushed out from the depths of the Grand Restriction soon. Mi Jingluan had already tried to overestimate the Black Ink clan's heritage as much as possible, but he realized that he had still underestimated them in the end. The royal lords didn't immediately rush out of the Grand Restriction as they weren't sure if the current opening would allow them to pass through safely. After a brief hesitation, one of the royal lords stepped forward. As soon as he took a step forward, the royal lord appeared outside the Grand Restriction and stood frozen in place for a moment, clearly surprised at how smoothly he had passed through. Martial Peak, Chapter 5967, Giant Spirit God Attacks. Even more royal lords stepped through the opening soon after, the convergence of their heaven-shaking, earth-moving auras distorting the void around them. Each royal lord's gaze was fixed in the direction of the human race army, expressions of cruelty and bloodlust clear on their faces. On Pure Yang Pass, Mi Jingluan looked on coldly before tossing out an object and shouting, "Go!" It was a round, bead-like object. Under the blessing of a Ninth Order master's strength, the small round bead quickly broke through the heavy blockade of the Black Ink clan and reached the royal lords. The gazes of the many royal lords were attracted to the round bead, but after examining it, they found that despite its peculiar appearance, it was not worth much attention. One of the royal lords threw a casual punch out at the round bead, shattering it instantly. Suddenly, a surprise occurred that caught all the royal lords off guard. When the round bead was shattered, countless universe fragments appeared out of nowhere, as if they were the remains of the round bead. Strong space principle fluctuations followed suit before 2 massive figures that blocked the heavens and covered the earth appeared. Each royal lord's face was filled with shock. On the other hand, Ada and Air, who were prepared beforehand, did not give the royal lords any time to react, launching a violent attack at them as soon as they appeared. Utterly terrifying giant palms slapped down, and the royal lords were swept up by the force. As blood burst forth, the sound of bones breaking rang out. The royal lords all screamed, some in pain, others in panic. None of them had expected 2 giant spirit gods to enter the battlefield in this manner, so they immediately took heavy losses from this sudden attack. Several royal lords were instantly pulverized into mist, their auras simply vanishing from existence, while the survivors scattered in all directions. This was the trump card of the human race. During the battle at the No-Return Pass, Ada and Aer were pinned down by the two black ink giant spirit gods and were unable to play a decisive role until Yang Kai teamed up with Ada to kill one of the black ink giant spirit gods, which greatly improved the human race's situation. But here, without black ink giant spirit gods to occupy them, the two giant spirit gods could perfectly demonstrate their terrifying might. The Black Ink clan did not have the means to stop such existences. Even a casual wave of a giant spirit god's hand was enough to smash anything it made contact with. Before the world bead they were hiding in was sent out, Ada and Aer must have received instructions from Mi Jingluan beforehand, so, when they saw the fleeing royal lords, Ada immediately went to pursue them while Aer stayed behind, his massive figure acting as a barrier to block the opening in the Grand Restriction. At the opening, the royal lords who had received the news gathered nearby but hesitated to step out, each of them looking fearfully towards the towering figure in front of them. Though the giant spirit gods were incredibly powerful, their immense size also made them less agile, so even after chasing the fleeing royal lords for a while, Ada was unable to capture any of them. Annoyed, he turned around and charged into the Black Ink clan army's formation instead. What followed was like a tiger descending upon a flock of sheep. No matter how many Black Ink clan soldiers fought back, giving their all, even their very lives, their attacks were no different to a calm breeze to Ada. The massive army was instantly disrupted and broken apart. Ada was like a rampaging bull, trampling and crushing everything in his path. Giant gaps had now been opened in the Black Ink clan army, which was already somewhat scattered to begin with. Mi Jingluan was overjoyed when he saw this and immediately gave the order for the entire army to attack. The human race army, which had already rearranged their formations, charged the Black Ink clan, but unlike before, they only had to deal with the scattered sections that had been cut out from the main force. This greatly reduced the pressure on them. Just as the human race army was launching their second attack, 10 figures flew out from the suppressing Black Ink fortress, but they did not head to the battlefield and instead flew in the opposite direction. In the midst of a battle, actions like this would normally be enough to label them as deserters, however, everyone turned a blind eye to this and regarded it as a matter of course. This couldn't be helped as the auras of these masters were fluctuating wildly, a sign that they were about to break through. Zhao Yibai, Su Yi, and Zhao Ya's figures were included amongst the 10. While members were being selected for the suppressing Black Ink army from the various armies, Mi Jingluan adhered to the principle of being lacking rather than excessive. That was because guarding the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction was not too dangerous a task then. They had divine dragon Fu Guang leading them and the cooperation of Wu Kuang, who had control over the Grand Restriction. All the suppressing Black Ink army had to do was intercept the Black Ink clansmen escaping from the opening. Taking the development of talent into consideration, Mi Jingluan had placed many promising candidates qualified to advance to the Ninth Order in the suppressing Black Ink army, distancing them from the brutality of the various great territory battlefields so they could focus on cultivating outside the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction in the hopes of advancing as soon as possible. Only, various changes occurred with the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction later on, leading to the increased danger outside of the Grand Restriction. No matter how incredible a strategist he was, Mi Jingluan could not predict all the changes that would happen over 2,000 years. Regardless, no one could deny that the suppressing Black Ink army was a force of elite masters. From the present situation alone, 10 masters out of the few thousand the suppressing Black Ink army was made up of were about to break through their limits and reach the Ninth Order open heaven realm. Such a proportion would be impossible to reproduce in any of the conventional armies. The 10 masters were currently only in the 8th Order open heaven realm, so even if they did put their lives on the line on this battlefield, the role they could play would not be significant. 8th Order masters were plentiful among the human race, so 10 more or 10 fewer would make no difference. However, if they were able to break through successfully and return as 9th Order masters, then even if only half of them succeed, the human race stood to gain 5 more 9th Order masters. Moreover, just from the recent situation alone, one could see that the success rate of the rising stars who have been nourished by the World Tree clones was surprisingly high when it came to ascending to the Ninth Order, far surpassing the generations of the past. These 10 had actually reached their limits a long time ago, but they have been trapped in the primordial heaven's source grand restriction and had not dared to break through so as to avoid exposing their whereabouts. The human race army charged, and even with the Black Ink clan going all out to resist, it was difficult for them to blunt this assault. The human race army brought an aura of death with them as they swept across the void, extinguishing the souls of countless Black Ink clansmen. Coupled with Da's wanton rampage, unimaginable losses had been created for the Black Ink clan in just a short period of time, and the situation was only growing worse for them. The Black Ink clan finally realized that things had taken a dire turn. 2 giant spirit gods suddenly appeared and completely disrupted their formation, especially the giant spirit god who was guarding the opening. If they did not defeat him, the Black Ink clan would not be able to receive reinforcements, and with the current strength of the human race, those outside the Grand Restriction would eventually be wiped out. The royal lords who left the Grand Restriction quickly understood this and began to take action. Fortunately for them, the humans were unable to divide their forces at this moment, and even the Ninth Order masters dared not rashly move independently. If they were trapped in the vast sea of Black Ink clansmen, no one can guarantee that they would be able to escape alive. Under this situation, as long as the royal lords did not actively provoke the human race army, they would not need to engage the Ninth Order masters. On the other hand, the only one who could act recklessly in the midst of the Black Ink clan army, Ada, was not very bright. Once his blood began pumping, he simply moved towards wherever there were more foes to deal with, so it was difficult for the human race army to coordinate with him even if they wanted to. Seeing this, the royal lords regrouped and charged brazenly towards Aer. Naturally, just 1 or 2 royal lords would not be a match for Aer, in fact, not even 10 of them would be able to deal with him. However, the number of royal lords that came out of the Grand Restriction was far greater than that. More than 40 royal lords charged towards Aer from all directions, and powerful secret techniques were launched one after another. Even a being as powerful as a giant spirit god staggered under such a heavy bombardment. Aer roared as he kicked and punched randomly, launching heaven-destroying, earth-shattering attacks one after another. However, most of these were dodged by the royal lords, and the few attacks that connected could not kill the royal lords with a single blow, only injuring them at most. This kind of swarming strategy was used by the Ninth Order masters to deal with the Black Ink giant spirit god in years past, but now it was being utilized by the Black Ink clan. However, Ninth Order masters were generally stronger than these inexperienced royal lords, so the humans needed just 20 or so Ninth Order masters to hold off one Black Ink giant spirit god back, whereas the Black Ink clan required a far greater number of royal lords. Startled by Aer's roar, Da finally regained some of his senses and turned to look towards the opening in the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction, rushing over in the next moment. When Ada arrived at the opening, more than 10 royal lords rushed out from it. The scene of 2 giant spirit gods teaming up to fight against more than 50 royal lords was extremely intense. Even more Black Ink clansmen gathered at the opening, among which were many royal lords as well. No one knew how many royal lords were hidden within the Grand Restriction. Their numbers within the dark space seemed to be endless and they never stopped coming no matter how many were cut down. Many royal lords were tangled up with the 2 giant spirit gods, but neither side could defeat the other. Meanwhile, the Black Ink clan soldiers behind the opening found opportunities to flood out and join the massive battlefield. On Pure Yang Pass, Mi Jingluan's expression was solemn. The human race's only trump card had already been played, but apart from the initial success they gained against the Black Ink clan, it hadn't been able to play a decisive role. Right now, Da and Aer were blocking the opening together, but all they were really doing was delaying the speed of reinforcements coming out. If this continued, the situation would become unfavorable for the human race as more time passed. No matter what strategies he could come up with, the key to winning or losing a war was still the balance of power. Compared to the Black Ink clan, the human race army was undoubtedly an elite force, but their numbers were just too limited. Casualties were inevitable in war, and once their army reached a certain critical limit in their losses, their momentum would collapse. When that time came, the human race army's fate on this battlefield surrounded by enemies would be tragic. And this was merely a war against the Black Ink Clan army. The Black Ink Clan army were not the only ones the humans had to fight against. The main enemy they were up against was the one who stood behind them, Mo. It was an unbelievably terrifying foe. Was there any hope for victory in this war? Mi Jingluan had no idea. All he knew was that as a human, one had to give their all in battle in order to leave no regrets behind. And, through the information coming in from Wuquang's side, what Yang Kai was doing would also be a key for them. If Yang Kai could succeed, then the situation may not be as bad as he imagined it to be. Just like the giant spirit gods Ada and Aer, Yang Kai was also a trump card for the human race. In the vast and desolate void, a faint light suddenly blossomed, quickly growing into a dazzling brightness that persisted for a long time before gradually subsiding. A graceful figure stood quietly in the void. She opened her eyes, revealing a pensive expression, as if she had vaguely understood something. "It's time to end this, once and for all." Saying so, a pair of glistening and beautiful wings suddenly spread out on her back. With a gentle flap of her wings, she shot off, breaking through the barriers of space in an instant. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5968, Long Journey. For several months, the battlefield was a bloodbath. The human race soldiers continued to weave through the battlefield, harvesting the lives of Black Ink clansmen. Their charge was unimpeded at first, but as more and more royal lords left the Grand Restriction, the pressure on the humans grew stronger and stronger. Ada and Aer were still blocking the opening of the Grand Restriction, but they could not stop all of the Black Ink clansmen, and when they were surrounded and attacked by dozens of royal lords at once, there would eventually be leaks in their blockade, and every time that happened, a large number of Black Ink clansmen would swarm out of the Grand Restriction. Many of the Black Ink clansmen who were unable to escape the circle of battle were caught in it and were annihilated without even a single bone left behind, but many more escaped unharmed to support their brethren on the battlefield. The entire void was flooded with rich Black Ink strength and bodies, which may be fine for the Black Ink clan, but for the humans, such an environment was brutal. Since the soldiers were constantly consuming purifying Black Ink pills, their medicinal efficacies were falling steadily. Ordinarily, the medicinal efficacies of a single purifying Black Ink pill would last for a few days, but after a months-long high-intensity fight, the medicinal efficacies of purifying Black Ink pill were only lasting less than 6 hours each now. Despite how many purifying Black Ink pills the humans had stockpiled beforehand, there was still a limit in the end. The same went for purifying light. Once the purifying Black Ink pills and purifying light ran out, regardless of how much of an advantage the humans had at that point, it would be hard to maintain it going forward. After fighting for so long, the human race army could no longer maintain the same intensity in battle. Now, when they charged, only half of the soldiers fought while the other half took the opportunity to rest and recover. This was the only method that Mi Jingluan could employ to maintain the combat capabilities of the human race army. But this plan would not work in the long term. As the number of royal lords increased, the pressure was also increasing for the humans, and the casualties were also rising at an alarming rate. The only comforting thing was that 8 of the 10 rising stars from the suppressing Black Ink army were able to advance to the Ninth Order. Including the Ninth Order Masters they had before, the total number of Ninth Order Masters now broke through the 40 mark. This was probably the final number of Ninth Order Masters for the human race. Before this war ended, no one else would be able to safely break through again. Among the 8 newly advanced Ninth Order Masters, Yang Kai's 3 legacy disciples were the most conspicuous. The 3 of them joined forces to perform Yang Kai's unique secret technique, the Sun and Moon Divine Wheel, killing more than 10 royal lords over the course of this battle. One should know that all 3 of them were in the Ninth Order now, so together, the might of the sun and moon divine wheel that they executed was even more powerful than even Yang Kai's. Moreover, Yang Kai's sun and moon divine will only contain spacetime strength, but their version also had the power of Zhao Ya's spear principles mixed in, which made it even more domineering. Even though the trio had just broken through, this secret technique was not something that the royal lords could resist. Unfortunately, the consumption of this secret technique was too great for the three of them, and they could only use it once a day. However, every time they did, a royal lord had died. The royal lords naturally took note of this, and whenever the trio appeared, multiple royal lords would move to engage them in a fight to the death. The human race army kept wandering the battlefield and fighting, slaughtering countless Black Ink clansmen, but the losses they sustained were also shocking. This seemed to be a war that would not end until both sides were wiped from existence. Despite having achieved far more than they ever had in any battle in the past, Mi Jing Luan on Puryang Pass did not feel happy, and that was because he could not see any hope of winning this war even now. The two giant spirit gods were still guarding the opening at the Grand Restriction. These two had restrained dozens of royal lords and even killed some occasionally, but they were conveyed in wounds and nobody knew how much longer they could persist. Once their support fell, the opening of the Grand Restriction would be left completely open and the Black Ink clan could come pouring out in far vaster numbers. Every Ninth Order master was draining a great amount of power. Not one of the 40+ Ninth Order masters was without injury. Some had even sustained such great damage from the royal lords that they almost lost their lives. Eighth Order masters were also struggling to maintain their battle formations. While the battle formations allowed the Eighth Order masters to become more powerful, it was also a burden on them, especially for those acting as the core of the formation. The pressure they faced was much more compared to that of the other Eighth Order masters. It was not a problem for a short period, but it was difficult for even the Eighth Order masters to maintain a battle formation for an extended time. At the beginning of the war, the Eighth Order masters were still able to form 7 stars and 6 paths formations, but even the 6 paths formation could no longer be seen now. The strongest battle formations they were using were now just 5 elements formations, while most of the Eighth Order masters were only maintaining the lowest 3 fortunes formation to fight against their enemies. It was not that they did not want to form stronger battle formations, but they were truly strong in will but weak in strength. As for the soldiers under the Eighth Order, many had died when their warships were destroyed. The purifying Black Ink pills and purifying light were constantly being consumed, and no matter how much they had been saving up, they would see the bottom of their stock sooner or later. Even the small stone race army, which Yang Kai had distributed to the human race army beforehand, had been decimated. The geography of the battlefield was also a major hindrance for the humans. The ever-growing Black Ink clouds and Black Ink strength that filled the entire void seemed to be turning the battlefield into a Black Ink ocean. The Black Ink clan were like fish in water in this environment, while the humans were being heavily restricted. The divine spirits roared as they fought, but even they could not change the course of this war. As the fighting progressed until this point, not only were the humans unable to see any trace of hope, but they were gradually being submerged in despair. However, no one retreated, because they all knew that this was a war that could not be lost. If this war was lost, then the human race was likely to be wiped from existence. Everyone was holding on, waiting for a chance to turn things around. That glimmer of hope was now inside the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction. Naturally, it was the person who could create all kinds of miracles, and the one who has led the humans on the path of survival for the past few thousand years. It could be said that the current heritage and capital that the human race possessed that allowed them to carry out a second crusade had to be credited to him. Nevertheless, he had not appeared yet. So, there was still hope for the human race. The 700th world was a scene of doom. Black Ink strength had already spread throughout the entire world. Yang Kai followed the faint trace and found the hiding Mu. After Mu infused all her remaining power into his body, she disappeared without a trace. In the 800th world, Yang Kai did not sense Mu's presence at all. Without hesitation, he activated the power that Mu's other shadows had left in his body and left this universe world. In the 900th world, peace reigned and everyone lived in harmony. Yang Kai successfully reunited with Mu and, with the help of the profound source gate, suppressed and sealed Mu's source piece before leaving quickly. The 1000th world. 100th. 200th. The cycle continued in a seemingly endless journey which Yang Kai was treading alone. Sometimes, Yang Kai needed only to follow the faint sensation to find Mu and then use the profound source gate to suppress and seal Mu's source piece. However, there were often times when things didn't go as smoothly as he hoped. There were universe worlds where black ink strength had spread everywhere, and even Mu's source piece had escaped. In these universe worlds, there was not much that Mu could do. She hid and waited for Yang Kai to arrive so that she could infuse the power of her shadow into his body. To make matters worse, there were some universe worlds where Mu had already been killed. Even though she was the most powerful of the martial ancestors, her shadows were only a state from a certain period of her life, and within those periods, her strength was limited. For example, in the 800th world, black ink strength dominated everything and Mu's shadow was missing. There was no reason for Yang Kai to even stay in such a world. There were also some worlds where black ink strength and Mu's powers competed against each other, similar to the situation in the primordial world. If Yang Kai had enough time, he wouldn't mind lending a hand to Mu, cutting off the wings of Mo and suppressing and sealing pieces of its source. However, through the messages transmitted by Wu Kuang from the jade pendant that he wore on his chest, Yang Kai knew that the situation both inside and outside the primordial heaven source grand restriction was dire. He didn't have any time to waste, so he could only give up when he encountered worlds like these. Mu's shadow in these worlds did not object to any of his decisions, always imbuing their power into his body. Passing through one world after another, Yang Kai soon lost track of how many source pieces he had suppressed and sealed. He only knew that the further he went, the greater the likelihood that an unexpected encounter would happen. Often, he would pass through many universe worlds in a row and still find it difficult to suppress and seal even one of Mo's source pieces. He knew that his journey would most likely come to an end soon. Once he had suppressed and sealed enough pieces, Mo would awaken completely, and then he would have to face the most powerful existence in the world. Yang Kai didn't dare to linger. Besides wanting to suppress and seal even more pieces, he also wanted to take away all of Mu's shadows from each universe world. This predecessor had done enough for the human race. Even though she had fallen, her life had been divided into 3,000 pieces and continued to protect the human race in the form of shadows. How lonely those shadows must have been over the years. Taking them away was also a kind of liberation for them. The power that the shadows infused into Yang Kai's body at their final moments seemed unremarkable. It couldn't even enhance Yang Kai's strength in the slightest, but this inconspicuous power was proof of Mu's existence and sacrifice. This was the greatest kindness his predecessor had given to the human race, so it was only right as a successor to show how grateful he was. There was little he could do for Mu. He could only try his best to free more of her shadows from their endless loneliness and waiting. It wasn't that he was unaware of the urgent situation the human race was facing outside the primordial heaven's source grand restriction. The information conveyed by Wu Kuang had already indicated that the humans were not in a good state currently. The prolonged intensity of this war had made it difficult for them to hold on any longer. Without external intervention, the human race would undoubtedly be defeated in this war, but Yang Kai was in no hurry to leave the space-time river despite knowing that. Because the enemies that the human race had to face were not only the Black Ink clan army, but also Mo. Nobody had any idea just how powerful the legendary creator realm was, so Yang Kai could only suppress and seal as much of its source as possible to weaken its power and increase the chances of the human race's ultimate victory. Martial Peak, Chapter 5969, It's Her. The towering bodies of the giant spirit gods were covered in wounds. They roared and bellowed, driving back one royal lord after another, like two powerful lions encircled by a pack of hyenas. Despite their immense strength and overwhelming power, the huge disparity in numbers allowed their small foes to run rampant. At this moment, there were almost 100 royal lords gathered around Ada and Aer. The giant spirit gods were powerful indeed, but they still had their limits in the end. Even together, Da and Aer could barely handle the 100 or so royal lords attacking them all at once. With the giant spirit gods fully occupied, the Black Ink clan were finally able to pour out of the Grand Restriction unrestrained. Powerful auras emerged from the opening one after another and joined the battlefield. All the advantages that the human race army had worked so hard to build up were melting away under the constant stream of enemy reinforcements. The war had reached a most despairing point. Yang Kai still had not shown up. The human race army had suffered huge losses in this battle. Whether it be their numbers or warships they were relying on, it was hard to keep up. The many defenses deployed on Pure Yang Pass had also been blasted apart. At this moment, Pure Yang Pass was only covered by a few layers of the simplest defensive arrays. If they were to take a few more attacks, then it was likely that even these last barriers would be broken. Standing up on the wall, Mi Jingluan sighed in his heart. The limit of the human race had already been reached at this point of the battle. If they continued to engage, the last of their forces would be buried here. Have we failed? Have we not done enough? No. That can't be. Since the Black Ink clan invaded the 3,000 worlds, thousands of years had gone by. The human race had not only recovered their homeland but also organized a strong force for a second crusade. They had crushed whatever stood in the way until they reached the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction. They had done well enough. A few thousand years was a very short time for the development of an entire race. That the humans could recover from almost total annihilation to what they had today was a feat worth being proud of. However, their enemy was simply too strong. From primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction, the Black Ink clan's reinforcements kept coming, and no matter how many royal lords were killed, more would appear to take their place. Even with the two giant spirit gods to support them, it was impossible to stop this. Wu Kuang. Mi Jingluan called out through his surging divine sense, "How much longer will junior brother Yang take?" "Not much longer," Wu Kuang responded, "but we can't just rely on him in this war. Once he finishes his side of things, Mo will completely awaken, so he will have his own opponent. And if Mo awakens, the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction will completely shatter. Once that happens, those hidden in the Grand Restriction will swarm out. When that happens, you will see the scale of the Black Ink clan army is much more than what you are currently seeing now. Then, is he a match for Mo?" Mi Jingluan asked another question. Wu Kuang answered without hesitation, "Naturally not. If he were to face off against Mo with his current strength, a death without burial is sure to await him." Mi Jingluan was silent for a moment, so to say, what we, the human race, are up against, is an unscalable wall. Wu Kuang responded, "You could say that. Then there's no other way. What are you planning to do?" A bitter look appeared on Mi Jingluan's face. "Nothing. Junior brother Yang told me about his encounters in the universe furnace previously, and he also mentioned something at the edge of the universe. He anticipated the situation today before the war began, so he left a path for the human race to retreat to." Wu Kuang was surprised. The edge of the universe. It's a long story. Mi Jingluan did not have the time to explain in detail. Junior brother Yang told me that if the human race really was no match for the Black Ink clan, there was no need for us to go down fighting. He told us to preserve our power as much as possible, and he will bring our remaining kin to another world where we can find a suitable place to live. Wu Kuang wondered, "Such a place exists?" Mi Jingluan was honest, "I don't know, but if junior brother Yang says it does, then it definitely exists. If it does exist, it's not a bad choice. I will try to buy you some more time. If you want to retreat, then go quickly. We can't predict what will happen if things continue to drag on." Many thanks, Mi Jingluan thanked him, knowing that Wu Kuang might put himself in danger by doing so. After all, the ones in charge of holding back the enemy while the army retreated were always in the most dangerous position. After coming to a decision, Mi Jingluan did not hesitate any longer. In this current situation, every moment of delay would further increase the casualties to the soldiers. However, to be forced from their homeland like this, to a new world in a place they did not know. It really was shameful. But reality did not give the humans much choice. As he was about to pass down the order, Mi Jingluan suddenly sensed something and turned to look into the distance. He didn't see anything at first, but in the next instant, a bright light swept over from that direction, and in the next instant, the distance grew much closer, and the light also became clearer. So fast. Mi Jingluan was astonished. Right now, he was a ninth-order open heaven realm master, and if he exerted all his strength, he could reach immense speeds, but even at his best, he would probably not be able to reach a tenth of that light speed. Such speed was not inferior even when compared to Yang Kai's instantaneous movement. Who is that? The direction the light came from was from beyond the spiritless land, where the human race army had also come from. In other words, the one arriving was most likely a human race master. But, was there such a master among the human race? When the army set out, all masters who could participate in the battle were conscripted. Those who were left behind were either the old, the infirmed, the children, or those with insufficient cultivation. How could there be such a master hidden among them still? Just as Mi Jingluan was feeling taken aback, the other ninth-order masters and royal lords in the battlefield also sensed the unfamiliar aura. Nobody paid attention when they first sensed it, as who would dare to be distracted when fighting a life-and-death battle? But in just a few breaths, all the masters wore astonished looks on their faces. It was because the unfamiliar aura was approaching the battlefield at a speed beyond what they could fathom, and following the approach of that aura, a powerful force that made even the ninth-order masters and royal lords tremble pressed down on them. In just an instant, the light pierced into the battlefield. Since Mi Jingluan first detected the aura until now, less than 10 breaths had passed. He had been staring fixedly at it, but even with his current abilities in the ninth order, he couldn't see the face of the person who was coming. He only vaguely saw what seemed to be wings open behind the person's back, and it was from those wings that the dazzling light was flowing out. As this figure swept through the air, a long ribbon of light was drawn across the void. What's more, this figure disintegrated everything that stood in its way. When the light broke into the battlefield, the Black Ink clan army which was fighting with great momentum melted away in swathes like snowflakes under the scorching sun. Wherever the light passed, flames of life were constantly being extinguished. Even powerful royal lords were no match for the new arrival. One royal lord wanted to intercept them, but he suddenly froze in place before he could even make a move. When the light swept past, fresh blood suddenly spurted from the neck of the royal lord as his head flew into the air. They cut a huge swath through the middle of the Black Ink clan army and instantly arrived at the opening in the Grand Restriction. This was the battlefield of 2 giant spirit gods and many royal lords. The ordinary Black Ink clansmen wouldn't even dare to approach carelessly, and the human race army were also incapable of fighting side by side with the giant spirit gods here. It could be said that Ada and Air had been in an isolated and helpless position all this while. It was only until now, when a powerful existence arrived to aid them. Without any words, countless sword waves burst forth from the light, shooting towards various places in the void. Black blood flew and cries of misery rang out as many royal lords' auras were extinguished. With support, Ada and Air immediately turned from defense to offense, each one roaring and venting their pent-up rage. In a short while, the intense battle suddenly calmed down, and time and space seemed to freeze at that moment. Around 100 royal lords gathered in 2s and 3s, surrounding the 2 giant spirit gods and the master that suddenly appeared in the middle of them. Though their numbers were plentiful, each royal lord still had grave expressions on their faces. This couldn't be helped as numerous royal lords had already been killed in that short encounter just now. Moreover, all of them died under the hands of this unwelcome guest. What infuriated them even more was the fact that they still couldn't get a clear look at who it was that attacked them. They only knew that the strength of this human was incredible. But the royal lords were not the only ones who did not see the face of the new arrival. Even the Ninth Order masters did not see it either, and it was mainly because this person was too fast and everything happened within a very short amount of time. Mi Jingluan was already preparing to withdraw the army, leaving the battlefield with the remnants of their forces and waiting for Yang Kai to lead them to a new world, but before the order could be given, a new, powerful helper appeared to aid them. Only the divine spirits had a vague sense of who this was, especially Fu Guang. As the most powerful one among the divine spirits and a divine dragon of the dragon clan, he knew some secrets that the other divine spirits did not. Feeling the aura of this person, he had some ideas. The noisy and fierce battlefield also calmed down. The sudden silence that descended across the entire void during the midst of such a huge battle was truly unprecedented. The dazzling light gradually faded, and under the attention of hundreds of millions of eyes, the face hidden until now was slowly revealed. It was a young woman with a beautiful face. The pair of white feathered wings behind her gave off a warm aura that seemed to dispel all the darkness of the world. Under the light of her feathered wings, the body of the person exuded inviolable power. Even Ninth Order masters would subconsciously glance away when they saw the face of that person. It's her. Mi Jingluan had an astonished look on his face. He had imagined that the person coming would be a rare expert hidden among the human race, but he never thought it would actually be her of all people. He remembered this woman. After all, he personally handled the selection for the Suppressing Black Ink Army back then. It could be said that he personally selected all 6,000 soldiers of the Suppressing Black Ink Army from each army one by one. The reason he remembered this woman in particular though was mainly because of her relationship with Yang Kai. She had also come from the Star Boundary and was a disciple of Langya Paradise. If not for these relations, he would not have chosen this woman to join the Suppressing Black Ink Army. Based on her potential, she should not have been qualified for it. But what puzzled him was how this woman could actually become so powerful in the short 2,000 or so years he had not seen her. He clearly remembered she had initially broken through to the Fifth Order. In other words, her limit in life should only be the Seventh Order. But now, her power had not only surpassed the Seventh Order, it had reached a realm that even he, a Ninth Order master, dared not look straight at. Just from how she was cutting down royal lords like vegetables, she seemed to be even more powerful than the giant spirit gods. Martial Peak, Chapter 5970, In My Name. Mi Jingluan was somewhat taken aback. It was simply difficult for him to comprehend what he was seeing in front of him. It's her. Fu Guang's expression changed slightly. Just like Mi Jingluan, he remembered this woman. She was originally a member of the Suppressing Black Ink Army, but since Yang Kai sent the Suppressing Black Ink Army to this place back then, he took her away again for some unknown reason. He may be the army commander of the Suppressing Black Ink Army, but he naturally would not interfere if Yang Kai wanted to take someone away. He did not even question why Yang Kai took her away in the first place. Since then, they had not seen a trace of this young woman again. Until today, when she appeared with awe-inspiring momentum. In just a short 2,000 years, she had grown from a peak Seventh Order master to something even the giant spirit gods would be wary of, so clearly some kind of transcendent events had been involved. Perhaps it was all Yang Kai's arrangement. Moreover, Fu Guang was sensing some other aura from this woman, an aura that did not belong to a human. It was such an extremely strong and pure aura that even he, a divine dragon, felt tense in its presence. Ruoshi, on the other side of the Suppressing Black Ink Fortress, Gu Pan was staring at the familiar face and figure with her mind in a bundled mess. She couldn't help but recall the scene when this junior sister of hers first entered Langya Paradise. At that time, Ruoshi was inexperienced and ignorant, and she had taken care of her in many because of their connection with Yang Kai. However, Gu Pan never expected that a day would come when this junior sister would grow to such a height that she could only look up to her. Zhang Ruo she had always been unusual, which Gu Pan knew. For example, she had directly advanced to the fifth order, but somehow, she still had room for another breakthrough after reaching the peak of the seventh order. It was for this reason that Ruo she was taken away by senior brother Yang. Maybe senior brother Yang noticed something back then. After coming out of the chaotic dead territory, Zhang Ruo she had rushed all the way here, but when she swept her eyes around, there was no trace of the person she was hoping to see, so a hint of disappointment flickered in her eyes. She was not worried about whether her sir was dead or not. With Sir's great strength and talent, he has ways of dealing with even the most dangerous of situations. If Sir is not here, then he has to be fighting against the Black Ink clan in some unknown place. She couldn't help but think back to the scene when Yang Kai entered the chaotic dead territory the previous time. In fact, she had left a thread of her consciousness out back then, but since she had to harmonize the powers of the burning light and serene glimmer with her own body, she had no space to pay attention to anything else. So, she did not even get to exchange words with him. Yang Kai's arrival at that time made her realize the urgency of the situation, so after he left, she risked everything to accelerate the merging process. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. After she left her retreat, she immediately rushed to the star boundary. From there, she moved to the no-return pass where she learned about the crusade plan from the Void Guard stationed at the Universe Temple. She changed directions and used the space arrays set up by the Void Guard to teleport to the outskirts of the spiritless land, then she rushed to the battlefield from there. If not for that, it would have taken half a year to rush all the way here from the chaotic dead territory even with her current ability. Fortunately, I didn't arrive too late. Zhang Ruo she cheered inwardly to herself. Scanning the battlefield with her beautiful eyes, she observed the difficult situation the human race army was in. Lifting her broadsword up high, which was the source of the sword waves that cut down the royal lords earlier. In the quiet center of the battlefield, under the attention of hundreds of millions of pairs of eyes, Zhang Ruo she slowly brought her hands together, holding the hilt of her broadsword with its tip pointing down, before she thrust it into the void at her feet. A soft murmur came from her mouth, and though her voice was not loud, every living creature on the battlefield could hear it clearly. In my name, dispel the darkness. The wings behind her suddenly flapped open, and the aura emanating from the woman with her head down became even more resolute and inviolable. A point of light bloomed where the sword point touched before it exploded out like a great sun, spreading in all directions at an incredible speed. It was purifying light. Since Yang Kai brought the purifying light out of the chaotic dead territory, the humans had used it to reverse many declining situations for thousands of years, and even used it to refine weapons like the evil purging divine spears, but no one had ever witnessed such a large-scale eruption of purifying light. Even when Yang Kai sacrificed millions of small stone race soldiers to condense a burst of purifying light, that was like comparing a firefly to the bright moon that was the eruption today. The roughly 100 royal lords gathered nearby were the first unlucky ones to be hit. When the light spread out, they were all immediately engulfed by it. The pure light brought endless warmth and brightness to the human race, but it was like the vilest poison to the Black Ink clan. Howling, the royal lords tried to retreat, but the light was everywhere, enveloping them fully. Rich Black Ink strength was continuously bursting forth from their bodies, fighting against the erosion of the purifying light. The light continued to spread out in all directions and countless Black Ink clansmen wailed in agony. The auras of every Black Ink clansman, from innate territory lords, acquired territory lords, to feudal lords, all were visibly weakening at an alarming rate. Meanwhile, the thick Black Ink clouds that had been built up on the battlefield these past months were wiped away, quickly melting away like snowflakes under the scorching sun. The dazzling light soon enveloped the entire battlefield. For every passing moment, the energies in large numbers of Black Ink clan soldiers were purified, causing them to fall in droves. The light gradually faded, and the situation on the battlefield had undergone a remarkable reversal. 30% of the Black Ink clan army that numbered in the hundreds of millions had been wiped out by the eruption of the purifying light, and their previously tight formations were now filled with holes. Worse still, the black ink clouds and black ink strength that had been accumulating all this time were basically gone. These black ink clouds that filled the battlefield had been severely restricting the human race army's performance, creating a hostile environment that hindered their movements. But now, the black ink clouds were swept clean, and the terrain advantage that the Black Ink clan enjoyed no longer existed. In terms of environmental advantage, both sides were back now to square one. And all of this was achieved with just one secret technique from Zhang Ruoxi. It was an astonishing feat. Even though the royal lords, who had been repelled by the purifying light, had suffered severe damage to their foundations, they were now even more determined to kill Zhang Ruoxi after witnessing her terrifying power. They had no idea where this woman had come from, but they knew she possessed a tremendous power that could completely restrain the Black Ink clan. If this woman was not dealt with, the Black Ink clan would be in great trouble. What was more, the radiance of the wings behind Zhang Ruoxi dimmed significantly after she brought out that burst of purifying light, and her delicate face was tinged with an unusual scarlet from her exertion. It was obvious that activating such a mighty purifying light explosion came at a cost to her. Now was the time when she was at her weakest. If they didn't kill her now, when would they? So, despite being extremely wary of Zhang Ruoxi, the royal lords still swarmed towards her. They were originally focused on restraining the giant spirit gods, Ada and Aer, but now, all of them had changed targets. Compared to the giant spirit gods, Zhang Ruoxi was their true nemesis. Figures in all directions rushed towards Zhang Ruoxi, aiming for her life. Ada and Aer roared in anger, and though they were able to hold down a group of royal lords with their powerful strength, they couldn't stop all of them. Even the group of royal lords that were stopped had volunteered to stay behind to pin down the two giant spirit gods. The remaining royal lords only had Zhang Ruoxi in their eyes, each one displaying intense murderous intent. Amidst the human race army, many Ninth Order masters grew anxious at this sight. Zhang Ruoxi was able to change the course of the battle with her power as soon as she appeared. Being able to control purifying light at will was the most vital weapon the human race needed at the moment. If she were killed like this, then even the last hope of the human race would be gone. Even if Zhang Ruoxi had previously demonstrated strength that surpassed even the giant spirit gods, it was obvious that bringing forth purifying light of such a scale consumed a lot of her strength. While she was now weakened, dozens of royal lords rushed towards her at once, and no one knew if she still had strength left to defend herself with. So, just as the royal lords took action, Mi Jingluan roared in anger, "All soldiers, follow me into battle." The massive Pure Yang Pass was the first to charge out, heading directly towards Zhang Ruoxi while the various armies followed closely behind. Mi Jingluan always had the appearance of a dignified scholar, and he was indeed a resourceful and shrewd man whose greatest strength was his strategic mind. Even in the most critical of situations, nobody had ever seen him lose his cool. Especially now that Pure Yang Pass was considered the human race's command center, it should have been guarded by the human race army while remaining in the rear. However, how could Mi Jingluan care about such things in this critical situation? One could even say that this was a gamble. Pure Yang Pass's mobilization had disrupted the human race Grand Army's tight formation. If they failed to save Zhang Ruoxi now, then the first one to be annihilated when the Black Ink clan surrounded them would be Pure Yang Pass. However, time waited for no one on the battlefield. Mi Jingluan could not afford to wait and make preparations and plans. Urgently, he compelled Pure Yang Pass forward in hopes that he could arrive at Zhang Ruoxi's side in time. Pure Yang Pass and the royal lords moved at the same time, and Zhang Ruoxi was clearly able to sense this. Understanding what her allies were thinking, she couldn't help but laugh as she called out, "No need to be anxious, Supreme Commander Mi. Since I've come, I have the ability to protect myself. Don't forget, it was Sir who taught me everything I know." While she was speaking, the royal lords had already closed in on her, hoping to kill her off quickly. The royal lords who were wounded by the purifying light did not hold back in the slightest. Each one of the attacks they used was the strongest in their arsenal. Instantly, terrifying powers broke out, and they were all converging on Zhang Ruoxi's position. This was different from their fight with the giant spirit gods earlier, where they were mainly focusing on restraining them. That was because the royal lords knew that trying to quickly kill the giant spirit gods would cost them a lot. The lives of many royal lords would have to be sacrificed if they were to attempt such a thing. What was more, once the Supreme One awakened, what would these trivial giant spirit gods count for? It was with those considerations that the royal lords maintained the intensity of their fight with the giant spirit gods, but they did not reach a point where their lives were put at stake. However, it was different when facing Zhang Ruoxi. Purifying light was something that even the royal lords feared greatly. Either they killed this woman, or they would be the ones to die. That was why no royal lord dared to hold back, and all of them charged at her with all the strength they had. Martial Peak, Chapter 5971, Personal Guard and Reinforcements. Dozens of heaven-destroying, earth-shattering attacks surged forward, causing even space to shatter, but at the center of this onslaught, Zhang Ruoxi remained calm and composed without any hint of panic. She raised the broadsword in her hand and lightly tapped the void in front of her. As the void warped, a void corridor was instantly formed. No one knew where the void corridor led, but a powerful aura was rapidly approaching from within the dark passage, surpassing even that of any royal lord or Ninth Order master. All the royal lords paled at the sight and became even more fierce in their attacks. However, before their attacks could land, a figure appeared from the void corridor, then 2, then 3. In the blink of an eye, 8 figures had emerged from the passage, guarding the space surrounding Zhang Ruoxi. Only now did the royal lords who had come close realize the true faces of these unexpected guests. Small Stone Race Masters. Many small stone race soldiers had appeared on the battlefield previously. They seemed to be peculiar creatures controlled by the human race that could fight alongside the humans. However, their strength was not generally too high, and after a series of intense battles, almost all from the small stone race had been killed. Even the royal lords never expected that this woman who appeared out of nowhere could also control the small stone race, and for the small stone race she summoned to be so ridiculously powerful. The aura emanating from each of these small stone race masters was comparable to that of a Ninth Order master, or possibly even more powerful. Moreover, there were 8 of them. These were Zhang Ruoxi's personal guard, a force that had never been seen before. Yang Kai was the only one who knew about the existence of these Ninth Order small stone race masters. When he went to the chaotic dead territory last time, he had experienced their might, and he knew that they were created through the harmonization of yin and yang by Zhang Ruoxi using her Heaven's Order bloodline. However, even Yang Kai did not fully know how many Ninth Order small stone race masters had been born in the chaotic dead territory. He only had an estimate. Back then, he had also attempted to bring them under him through the great sun and moon marks, but he had unfortunately failed. At that time, he speculated that the only person who could control them was Zhang Ruoxi, so, even though he thought it was a pity, he ultimately gave up on them. As it turned out, he was right. There were a total of 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters, and their auras were linked as soon as they appeared, instantly forming a magnificent battle formation. At the center of this battle formation was Zhang Ruoxi, who was being protected by them. The eyes of the Ninth Order masters who rushed over were bulging when they saw this, with O Yang Lai exclaiming, an 8 trigrams formation. The simplest battle formations was the 3 fortunes formation, followed by the 4 symbols, 5 elements, 6 paths, 7 stars, 8 trigrams, and finally the 9 palaces. The increase of each stage was based on the increase of cultivators involved. The stronger the battle formation, and the higher the cultivations of those involved, the harder it was to form. Perhaps there were some parties who could cooperate intimately under the high-rank open heaven realms that were able to form the 8 trigrams or even 9 palaces formations, but once the cultivation level reached the high-rank open heaven realms, it was difficult for higher battle formations to be formed. In the existing records, the highest battle formation that 7th Order Masters could form was the 9 palaces formation, which was a miracle achieved by the Dawn Squad under Yang Kai's leadership. Besides him, nobody else in the 7th Order had achieved such a feat. Even the 8 trigrams formation was difficult to maintain for 7th Order Masters because the pressure on the person acting as the core was too much. Meanwhile, the strongest battle formation that 8th Order Masters could form was the 8 trigrams formation, which was used to kill pseudo-royal lords. However, every time 8th Order Masters formed such a battle formation, the backlash resulted in some, if not all of them perishing. From this, it can be seen that it was extremely difficult for high-rank open heaven realm masters to form higher-level battle formations. As for the 9th Order Masters, generally, no one would form a battle formation. Not because it was impossible, at the very least, the simplest 3 fortunes formation could be maintained, but because there were only so many 9th Order Masters. Even if forming a battle formation could make one stronger, it also consumed manpower and reduced flexibility. The 9th Order Masters were already the strongest fighting force of the human race, so rather than concentrating all their power in one formation, it was better to let them act independently, which could better bring out their abilities. Theoretically, however, 9th Order Masters should be able to form for symbols formations, but anything higher may not be possible unless they had someone like Yang Kai to act as the formation core. With his divine dragon body, he should be able to bear the burden of a 5 elements formation. As for a 6 paths formation, the possibility most likely only existed in theory. But what were the 9th Order Masters witnessing at this moment? 8 9th Order Small Stone Race Masters had instantly formed an 8 trigrams formation. Even though they were separate individuals, they could perfectly form into a single entity without any strain. Such an incredible feat would be hard to believe if one did not witness it with their own eyes. 8 9th Order Small Stone Race Masters joining forces formed an impenetrable barrier around Zhang Ruoxi. Despite the attacks of the dozens of royal lords connecting as was expected, their heaven-destroying, earth-shattering techniques could not even budge the small stone race in the slightest. One should know that an attack of this level would injure even a giant spirit god. The royal lords were shocked beyond measure, but before they could react, a bright sword beam began to flicker, and the figure of Zhang Ruoxi, who was protected in the center by her personal guards, suddenly blurred. This just happened to be a moment when the royal lords were putting their all into delivering their most powerful attacks, so they did not have time to circulate energy into defending themselves. As a sword light flickered, black blood and heads flew. In an instant, the auras of nearly 10 royal lords swelled up before fading away. The surviving royal lords all retreated in shock. They had been living in the primordial heaven source grand restriction for their entire lives, so they had little understanding of the human race. However, they had been fighting against the giant spirit gods for months now, and they had the assumption that the giant spirit gods were the last trump cards of the humans. It was not until this moment that they realized that there was a more terrifying existence in this world besides the giant spirit gods. An existence of this level was something that perhaps only the Supreme One could defeat. The surviving royal lords wanted to escape, but soon enough, they realized that they were not only being pursued by the winged woman, but also by the 9th Order Small Stone Race Masters. The moment Zhang Ruoxi took action, so did the 8, who had formed the 8 trigrams formation. They spread out the battle formation and all charged towards the royal lords. The royal lords were caught in an extremely unlucky situation, but even though they had been injured by the purifying light before, they still had the heritage of royal lords and were not afraid of a single 9th Order Small Stone Race Master. However, they soon realized that something was not right as they clashed with these Small Stone Race Masters. There was something unusual about the strength displayed by them, and it seemed to far exceed what should be expected. Upon closer inspection, they were shocked to discover that the aura of these small stone race masters were still closely connected to each other despite the fact that all of them were seemingly fighting alone. Most crucially, their auras were constantly changing and they could form different battle formations at any time or switch which one served as the core of that battle formation at will. The masters who had rushed over to help also noticed this, and all of them had incredulous expressions on their faces because what they saw before them was impossible according to everything they understood. When human race masters formed battle formations, they had to take great care in maintaining the connection of their auras. The worst possibility was if a battle formation collapsed due to the link being broken. Each time humans assumed battle formations, the masters had to divert some of their attention to maintaining its operation. However, when they looked at these ninth-order small stone race masters, it seemed that their control over their auras had reached an instinctual level. They could disperse or form any battle formation in an instant. One might think they were alone, but in fact, they had 7 other brothers behind them who could help to crush their enemies at any time. They were just like parts of a single entity. As the group of human masters watched on, they felt both amazed and ashamed. They had no idea how these ninth-order small stone race masters did it, but they knew that the humans could never achieve such a thing. Even if they had full and complete trust in each other, each individual among their race had their own way of thinking. Even more fundamentally, there were differences in strength and aura among humans, so achieving a perfect balance was just now feasible. The appearance of the 8 ninth-order small stone race personal guard not only helped to relieve Zhang Ruoxi's crisis, but also opened up a counterattack opportunity against the royal lords under Zhang Ruoxi's leadership. But that was not the end of it. The void corridor that Zhang Ruoxi had created with her amazing skills did not disappear. Following closely behind the 8 ninth-order small stone race masters, more of the small stone race soldiers stepped out from it. They continued emerging in an endless stream, too many to even be counted. In just a short amount of time, an army of millions had gathered outside the void corridor. Even though there weren't many masters among them, their numbers were still a sight to behold. And all this was just the beginning. As even more emerged, they soon began covering the void, filling one's field of vision. Previously, when they were facing the constant influx of Black Ink clan reinforcements from the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction, the human race were at a loss, and there were even those who wished that they had their own reinforcements, too. At this moment, that seemingly impossible wish was being fulfilled. Moreover, these small stone race soldiers were somewhat different from the ones that the humans had encountered before. Due to their low sentience, the small stone race acted almost entirely on instinct. This meant that without being refined and controlled by the humans, they were just like scattered sand and it was difficult for them to unleash their full potential in large-scale warfare. However, those that walked out of the void corridor at this moment had formed one imposing and uniform army. The first small stone race army to come out did not blindly charge at the Black Ink clan, but scattered apart to guard the void corridor so that even more of their companions could emerge. It was as if someone was commanding and controlling them. Many human race masters who realized this turned their gaze to the figure who was slaughtering the royal lords and drawing an endless stream of wails from them. She was perhaps the only person who could command and control so many of them. The chaotic dead territory. Mi Jingluan realized where the void corridor led to. For so many small stone race masters to come out, the place the void corridor was connected with had to be the chaotic dead territory, a paradise for the small stone race. According to Yang Kai, the burning light and serene glimmer had nurtured countless of them, and the ones he brought out and handed to the human race were simply scavenged from the chaotic dead territory. Assist them in guarding the void corridor. Mi Jingluan made an immediate decision and changed his previous order. Martial Peak, Chapter 5972, Racial Superiority. Zhang Ruoxi no longer needed help from the humans to save her, but whether it be the void corridor that was connected to the chaotic dead territory or the opening at the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction, those places needed to be guarded, and they were also the key locations that would help the human race army turn defeat into victory. Everyone was glad since the two entrances were not far away from each other, so they would not have to scatter their forces too much to guard both points. At the same time as when Mi Jing Luan gave his order, some of the masters from the Black Ink clan realized that things were taking a bad turn for them. Large armies of small stone race were constantly pouring out of the void corridor that led who knew where. In just a short while, tens of millions of them have come out. If they did not bring down that void corridor, then it would not take very long for the small stone race to even the playing field with them in terms of numbers, and if that were to happen, then it would not simply be the humans that they had to deal with. While the human race army were rushing to the void corridor, many masters from the Black Ink clan led their own subordinates in the same direction. The void corridor to the chaotic dead territory had instantly become a focal point of the battlefield, catching the attention of millions of pairs of eyes. Even though the human race army moved sooner than the Black Ink clan, they were also further away, so, when they were only halfway there, the Black Ink army had already surrounded the void corridor in all directions, but the emergence of the small stone race had also diverted much of their attention, which resulted in the situation becoming much safer for the human race. A war that was even more intense from the fight between the human race and the Black Ink clan broke out. Although the human race army was completely made up of elite soldiers, they were very limited in numbers. During the previous confrontation, the human race army's strategy was to use superior mobility to slaughter as many enemies caught in their path as possible. Rarely would they engage in large-scale head-to-head confrontations with the Black Ink clan. The current situation with the small stone race was different. They were desperately defending the void corridor, so there was simply no way to retreat or escape. Once the Black Ink clan army were to come in from all directions, both sides would immediately break out into a stunning battle. Both sides were like two colliding torrents with countless bodies caught in the rolling waves. Those from the small stone race were constantly incurring casualties, but their numbers were also being replenished continuously. Even though they were far inferior to the Black Ink clan in terms of numbers, with battle formations and momentum, they managed to hold their ground. It was as if there was an invisible hand that was controlling everything about the small stone race, so that these creatures that were supposed to have little sentience and could only act on instinct could now be molded into a single strict army that knew when to advance or retreat. There were not too many masters among the small stone race, and the drawbacks of that were soon apparent. This was Yang Kai's inadvertent mistake when he took so many 8th Order and 7th Order small stone race masters with him on his last trip to the chaotic dead territory, resulting in the small stone race army lacking masters among them. The small number of 8th Order small stone race masters here were no match for the pseudo-royal lords, so no matter how much they replenished their numbers, it took only a few moments of fighting before the Black Ink army were able to find opportunities to rip several openings into their line of defense. Fortunately, the human race army arrived just in time. Under Mi Jing Luan's command, the humans immediately split into several groups and plugged into the different openings to fill them. With the help of the 9th Order masters, they were able to hold their line, albeit only barely. The situation was still not looking optimistic. The Black Ink clan army's attack was growing increasingly intense, and if the small stone race army couldn't gather enough mass, then there was still a risk of their lines being broken through. The small stone race in the void corridor were already gathering their troops at the maximum speed possible, but they could only barely keep up with the rate of their casualties. The defensive line kept on shrinking and the space for the joint forces of the small stone race and the human race to move around in was constantly being constricted. Black Ink clan seemed to have found a ray of hope and was attacking more and more aggressively. Originally, Zhang Ruoxi's emergence and ruthless slaughter were enough to deter the royal lords who were eager to attack, and now, no royal lord dared to come out from the Grand Restriction, fearing that they would be killed next. However, one royal lord saw the situation from the opening of the Grand Restriction and rushed out without care to hold back the 9th Order masters and put pressure on the opposing forces. Now, the defense line being held up by the human race army and the small stone race army was in danger of collapsing at any moment. Once the defense line collapsed, not only would they not be able to defend the void corridor, but even the human race army that came to help would also be caught in the Black Ink clan's encirclement. At that point, other than the Ninth Order masters who had the ability to escape, the others would all be at great risk. Red-eyed, Ada was fighting a group of royal lords. He had always been silly and foolish, so he was surrounded by the royal lords previously until he was covered in injuries. Now, he only wanted to kill his enemies ruthlessly without a care for anything else. On the other hand, Air, who was smarter, noticed the situation on the human race army's side, but he was powerless to help even though he wanted to. Just like Ada, he was surrounded by royal lords and was simply unable to divert his attention unless he could get rid of them. The only ones they could put their hopes on, Zhang Ruoxi and her 8 personal guard, were still chasing after the royal lords who had scattered and fled in all directions. There were dozens of royal lords at first, but only a little over 10 of them remained, all of whom were agile with their movements and had good luck, but under her pursuit, they would also fall sooner or later. She did not seem to have any intention of coming to their rescue. Just as the battlefield on the joint army's side reached a limit and their defense was about to collapse, Zhang Ruoxi, who was chasing after the royal lords, suddenly stopped in place and without even looking, lightly clenched a fist in the direction of the void corridor. With this clenched fist, heaven and earth hummed and trembled. All over the battlefield, yellow and blue lights suddenly started moving. These lights came from the remains of the small stone race soldiers that were scattered among the Black Ink clan army. Since they did not possess flesh, if they were torn to pieces, not a drop of blood would flow out. They would only turn into pieces of stone like this. The power that nurtured them still remained in the debris. It was naturally the powers of the burning light and serene glimmer, the purest power of yin and yang. As the light emerged, all of the Black Ink clansmen who were enveloped by it had frightened looks on their faces. They had no idea what the yellow and blue colors represented, but they had witnessed the power of the purifying light that Zhang Ruoxi had brought forth before. That was why the Black Ink clan had gained an instinctive fear of this strange light. Most of the Black Ink clan were still shocked by the changes around them. A few of the sharper masters wanted to retreat when they noticed the situation turning against them, but how could they have the time to run? The defense line of the human race and the small stone race had been suppressed again and again. The Black Ink clan army surrounded them on all sides and were pressing hard, passing through the remnants of countless fallen small stone race along the way. It could be said that the Black Ink clan's frontline army was now fighting amidst a sea of the small stone race soldiers' broken remains. The yellow and blue colors swirled together, quickly turning into a dazzling pure white light that was scattered at first, but in the blink of an eye, condensed together. The white light was like an ocean, covering the vast battlefield. From within that white light, the countless screams and wails from the Black Ink clan rang out. Regardless of their cultivation, all of their bodies began to sizzle as if they had fallen into a wok of boiling oil, and following that phenomenon, the Black Ink strength in their body began to dissipate and become purified. Those caught in the center of the white light were the most greatly affected, and soon, those with insufficient cultivation perished. Even if some managed to survive, their foundations were severely damaged. The best time to cull them was now, when they were weakened, and the counterattack of the human race and small stone race armies commenced in an instant. The small stone race members were being controlled by Zhang Ruoxi, who naturally would not miss such a good opportunity, and when the humans saw the flowing yellow and blue lights, they realized what was about to happen. After all, they had witnessed this kind of scene before from Yang Kai. So, before Mi Jingluan could even give the order, the human race army had already blown the horn to begin their attack alongside the small stone race army. On Pure Yang Pass, Mi Jingluan sighed in his heart, no wonder Zhang Ruoxi said that she was taught everything she knew by Yang Kai. This manner of dealing with her enemies is carved from the same mold. The Black Ink clan army suffered grave losses due to being caught off guard in this unexpected situation, and the troops on the front line were completely annihilated almost instantaneously. Even several of the royal lords, who had jumped into the battle from the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction, died in this trap. The defensive line that had been suppressed to the limit began to expand in all directions, and with the collapse of their army in the front lines, the Black Ink clan's rear also quickly withdrew. By the time the dazzling light subsided, the intense exchange of offense and defense had ended as well. The joint army's defense line was restored to its previous state, but they did not continue pursuing the fleeing Black Ink clan, not because they did not want to, but because they could not. Right now, their main focus was protecting the void corridor that led to the chaotic dead territory. As they watched the small stone race army gather in the void from afar, the Black Ink clan was overcome with grief and anger. The Black Ink clan possessed too many advantages over the humans. They were created from black ink nests, so they could be bred in numbers sufficient to crush the humans. Moreover, their black ink strength was also extremely disadvantageous for humans. If the humans wanted to fight with them, they had to make all sorts of preparations beforehand. For example, they had to take their purifying black ink pills just so they could defend against being corrupted. This was their racial superiority, granted to them by their creator. Nobody could change that imbalance. However, when compared to the small stone race, the superiority of the Black Ink clan crumbled. The small stone race may not be able to reproduce as quickly as the Black Ink clan, but they had an advantage in comparison to the human race. They had no fear of black ink strength, and they were even extremely sensitive to it. If nobody was controlling them, then they would simply rush to where black ink strength was densest. But what disgusted the Black Ink clan the most was the fact that these small stone race soldiers treated them as mortal enemies when they were alive, and when they were dead, the powers remaining in their bodies could still be drawn out to condense purifying light that perfectly countered black ink strength. Having suffered a huge loss twice already, the surviving Black Ink clan soldiers no longer dared to act rashly. So what if they wiped out those from the small stone race? Without the ability to dispose of their corpses, the rubble that was left behind was still a great weapon against the Black Ink clan. Looking from afar, the Black Ink clan army was hesitant to act. The small stone race was beginning to show some unusual movements. Everywhere the human race army was located, a small stone race army would be there, opening up a passage to the rear. Initially, the humans did not understand what they were trying to do, but soon, the humans realized and reacted. The small stone race army had taken the initiative to open a passage to the void corridor so as to allow the human race army to head inside to guard it. At the same time, the small stone race army surrounded the interior, the area around the void corridor, in layers so that the human race army had the chance to recuperate peacefully for a while. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5973, Vigorous. This was clearly Zhang Ruoxi's intention. It was simply impossible for those of the small stone race to decide on such an action by themselves with their low sentience. Many of the human race masters were overjoyed. After months of fighting such a fierce battle, they hardly had any time to rest and recuperate. Each army was about to reach their limits, and even the Ninth Order masters were no longer at their peak. Otherwise, Mi Jingluan would not have had the idea of withdrawing the whole army previously. No one could have thought that a safe place for them to rest and readjust their conditions would still be able to exist in the middle of such an intense battlefield. Even though this time to recuperate would not last for long, in these circumstances, any time they had for recuperation was precious. So, after they understood what the small stone race army's intentions were, the human race army did not hesitate to retreat to the direction of the void corridor. The openings were once again filled in by the densely packed troops of the small stone race army. Looking at the small stone race figures that filled the void in all directions, the humans could not help but feel a sense of security, and the tension that had been building up in their minds over months had also eased up completely. A large number of pills were distributed, as well as various combat supplies. This time, the human race no longer held any reservations. They used up all the supplies that they had been saving up since this was their last battle. This battle was about the survival of their race, and if they were to win, they would remain the masters of this world, but if they were to lose, then there would be no humans left. What was the point of rationing supplies at these times? Naturally, they should restore the strength of their army as much as possible in preparation for the final battle. Soldiers of the small stone race were still constantly coming out of the void corridor, and their number was growing bigger and bigger. The surviving Black Ink clansmen would not dare to act rashly anymore. Masters from the Black Ink clan were all looking at the small stone race, all of them feeling a throbbing headache over the situation. Moreover, what they had to deal with now was not only the joint forces of the small stone race and human race army. When Ada and Aer were joined by the 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters on the other side of the battlefield, the royal lords who were attacking the 2 giant spirit gods were caught off guard. They were all so shocked that their souls nearly left their bodies. The 8 small stone race masters had appeared, so that woman must not be far behind. It was only then that the Black Ink clan discovered, to their horror, that all the royal lords who had participated in the attack against Zhang Ruoxi had fallen. This sent chills down the spines of all the royal lords. One had to know that there had been dozens of royal lords working together, and yet such a powerful force had been decimated in such a short time. The number of royal lords surrounding Ada and Aer was not far from the number of royal lords who went to attack Zhang Ruoxi, but their allies had all been killed, so they were probably next on the chopping block. When they noticed Zhang Ruoxi's aura approaching from afar, many royal lords left Ada and Aer and turned around, making for the opening in the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction. Together, they instantly broke through the defense line of the small stone race army and plunged into the Grand Restriction without even glancing back. For some of them, it had only been days ago they were dreaming of escaping this cage called the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction and conquering everything before their eyes. They had waited millions of years for this dream to come true. However, the feelings of joy did not last long. They had now realized that there was no safer place in this universe than the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction. Unless the Supreme One woke up, no one could stop that woman's massacre. With nearly half of the royal lords who were restricting them out of the way, and with 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters assisting them, the 2 giant spirit gods turned the tide in an instant. Ada reached out and grabbed a royal lord who was trying to escape and, with a roar of rage, stuffed the royal lord into his mouth. No matter how hard the royal lord struggled, he could not shake off his huge hand. Once he had been sent into the large abyss, Ada bit down on him. As if he were biting into a worm, black blood spurted between his teeth and the royal lord's aura was instantly obliterated. Ada then roared, venting his anger. He was a powerful giant spirit god, yet he was being put into such a miserable situation under the encirclement of the royal lords. This insult was simply unbearable. Aer did not stay idle either, he punched and kicked, each blow appearing simple, but could in fact crush a large piece of the void, blocking the royal lord's plans of escaping. The wings on Zhang Ruoxi's back flapped, sending her across the battlefield as a long pure white band of light trailed behind her in an exceptionally beautiful sight. She did not care about the battlefield or the giant spirit gods and instead charged straight past it and into the opening of the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction. Many other royal lords were watching the battlefield from within the Grand Restriction, including those who had fled back inside. They thought that they were safe inside the Grand Restriction. But then disaster followed. A commotion erupted at the opening, and royal lords were being slaughtered rapidly, their miserable screams ringing in the void. At the center of the small stone race army's defenses, among the human race soldiers who were recuperating near the void corridor, countless masters looked on in awe at this amazing scene. They had never felt as good and as happy as they were at this moment. Now that gets the blood going. Yang Lai quietly wiped the sweat from his forehead as he refined the medicinal efficacies of his spirit pills. Even he did not expect Zhang Ruoxi to enter the Grand Restriction. It was truly an attention-capturing event, especially since that was where the Black Ink clan's mother nest or source was located. Who knew how many royal lords were gathering inside? He had met Zhang Ruoxi a few times before and knew that this woman was very close to Yang Kai, but he had never known that she was this powerful. But what tickled his curiosity even more was how this woman's shocking cultivation had come about. The power that she wielded had already surpassed that of the giant spirit gods. There were still an indistinct but large number of figures standing around at the opening, and many more of the Black Ink clan's reinforcements were pouring out to provide support on the battlefield. However, Zhang Ruoxi rushed in and cut them all down like vegetables, sweeping the entrance clean until no more of their figures could be seen, and the Black Ink clan's reinforcements also came to an abrupt halt. It was not until an hour later that a figure emerged from the opening, the wings behind her back still as glossy as jade, a sight that dazzled all that beheld it. "Damn woman! Have some consideration for the elderly." The voice of Wu Kuang rang out beside Ruoxi's ears, sounding slightly helpless. He was tasked with controlling the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction and was united as one with it in a sense, so every time the Grand Restriction was ripped open, he would suffer a certain amount of backlash. The openings that happened previously were mostly done of his own accord, so he could control them to a certain extent. However, when Zhang Ruoxi suddenly rushed in, the large opening in the Grand Restriction had been torn apart 3 times before, and though royal lords could pass through it, it was still not enough for someone like Zhang Ruoxi to pass through. Just now, Wu Kuang had almost shrieked when he saw Zhang Ruoxi rushing over. From his standpoint, it was as if an unstoppable force was charging at him. Even though he expanded the opening as fast as he could, he was still caught off guard by Zhang Ruoxi's sudden charge and he could not regain control for a while. The feeling was just like having his entire being ripped apart. And that was why he had to complain. Zhang Ruoxi smiled, more or less understanding Wu Kuang's meaning. She then apologized, "Forgive me, Senior. It was Junior who was reckless." She was strong, beautiful, had a sweet voice and a pleasant demeanor, so what could Wu Kuang say? After holding it in for a while, he let out a sigh and muttered, "You did well." While others could not see what was going on inside the Grand Restriction, he could still feel a thing or two since he was in control of it. Within an hour of Zhang Ruoxi entering the Grand Restriction, no less than 30 royal lords had been executed. As for the weaker Black Ink clansmen, countless had perished. If not for the fact that the Grand Restriction was indeed unsuitable for long fights, Zhang Ruoxi would not have come out so quickly. Instead, she would probably have continued fighting for as long as possible before re-emerging. Senior is too generous. Junior has only done what was necessary. She looked up into the void. In the hour since she disappeared, something else had changed on the battlefield. The most obvious one was the fact that Ada and Aer had finally been freed from their predicament. The 2 giant spirit gods had been besieged by dozens of royal lords and were having trouble getting out, but thanks to Zhang Ruoxi's deterrent, nearly half of the enemies had fled back into the Grand Restriction. The remaining half were no match for the 2 giant spirit gods and the 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters and were soon smashed into pulp. At the same time, the small stone race army, which had been guarding the void corridor all this while, began to move as well. Up until then, they had been firmly guarding the space around the void corridor and even had the strength left to provide a sanctuary for the tired human race soldiers to rest and recuperate. But as time passed, more and more small stone race soldiers emerged from the passage. There were now over 100 million of them, and even more continued to pour out. No one had any guesses as to just how many small stone race soldiers there were gathered at the other end of the void corridor still. The number of troops that the small stone race had already surpassed that of the surviving Black Ink clan army. So, they attacked with determination. Divisions of the small stone race army launched themselves like rockets in the direction of the Black Ink clan army, holding them down in an endless spree of slaughter. A battle broke out again, but this time, the attacking and defending parties were reversed. In the short time that passed, the small stone race had already amassed enough forces to confront the Black Ink clan head-on. The Black Ink clan was still massive in number, but they were being purged at an astonishing rate, demonstrating that they were also exhausted and defenseless. The smartest option now would be to make a strategic retreat. But where else could they retreat to other than the primordial heaven's source grand restriction? The void within primordial heaven's source grand restriction was their home, their foundation, but even if they could escape, the primordial heaven's source grand restriction could not move. To retreat back to the primordial heaven's source grand restriction, they had to first break through the small stone race army's blockade. As a result, the Black Ink clan army had no choice but to fight. As for the consequences that could arise from killing them, the Black Ink clan lacked the energy to care right now. By the time Zhang Ruoxi showed up, the two armies had already been fighting for a while, and while the small stone race army had suffered some losses, the Black Ink clan had suffered much more than them. This could not be helped, as though the small stone race army did not have many masters compared to the Black Ink clan. They had the help of 2 giant spirit gods and 8 ninth-order small stone race masters. The Black Ink clan's defense lines held for less than an incense stick of time before the 2 giant spirit gods killed their way through and began wreaking havoc on them. The same was true of the 8 ninth-order small stone race masters. Even the royal lords who were lucky enough to survive the initial culling could not hold out long against them. On the other hand, the humans, the ones who started this war, were resting at ease with the strong protection provided by the small stone race army. This gave the ninth-order masters that were led by Mi Jingluan mixed feelings in their hearts. Martial Peak, Chapter 5974, Long-Term Goal. Strictly speaking, this Second Crusade was taking place despite the human race not being fully prepared. Readiness was not a matter of willpower, but rather an accumulation of strength. It was easy to see just by the results alone. Without the help of Zhang Ruoxi and the small stone race army, the human race would have been defeated already. The original plan was for Mi Jingluan to withdraw with the army and wait for Yang Kai to return before leading the survivors to a new, distant world. Once they left, this whole region, covering the entire 3,000 worlds, would surely fall under the Black Ink clan's total control. Was it because the human race did not fight hard enough? Was it because the heavens did not favor them enough? It was neither. Great potential could erupt from a race during the critical juncture between life and death. In just a short few thousand years, the human race has grown from near total decimation to recovering the 3,000 worlds and the no-return pass, but that was already their limit. If they had not worked hard enough, they would not possess the heritage they have today, and if the heavens did not favor them, they would not have the open heaven realm cradles. However, when it came to facing powerful foes like the Black Ink clan, what ultimately mattered was strength. The time given to the human race was too short, so no matter whether or not they were ready for this crusade, they had to go on. That was because Mo was about to awaken. Under such circumstances, it was better to be proactive than reactive. After all these years of fighting, the human race army had already been tempered into one entity after going through the baptism of war, but it was still not enough. As the battle raged on, Mi Jingluan weighed his options before deciding to give up on supporting the small stone race army. The battle had not reached an end yet, and the small stone race army should have enough troops to hold their own. What's more, after this battle came to an end, there would be an even more treacherous one waiting for the human race army. The current human race army had to recover its strength for that impending moment. On the battlefield, cloud after dazzling cloud of purifying light erupted and filled the vast void, dispersing not only the scattered Black Ink strength, but also the Black Ink clan soldiers that were enveloped in it, severely damaging their foundation. The current situation on the battlefield was extremely bad for the Black Ink clan. The primordial heaven source grand restriction was no longer providing reinforcements, and even the royal lords did not dare to go near the opening to check out the situation for fear of being seen by Zhang Ruoxi and drawing her wrath upon themselves. On the other hand, the small stone race soldiers still had a steady stream of reinforcements pouring endlessly out of the void corridor and entering the battlefield. Even though the Black Ink clan had tens of millions of troops left, it was still difficult to hold off their enemies effectively after losing the few royal lords and pseudo-royal lords they had to the 8 ninth-order small stone race masters. The 2 giant spirit gods rampaged, and the 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters were also advancing like they were chopping down bamboo. Division after division of uniformed small stone race troops swarmed in from all directions. The circle was constantly shrinking, and lives from the Black Ink clan dissipated alongside its progress. It wouldn't be long before the small stone race army was able to wipe out the Black Ink clan forces scattered outside of the primordial heavens source grand restriction. On the 2306th world, where Yang Kai was suppressing and sealing Mo's source, a large battle was similarly going on. Mu's shadow was holding back the many Black Ink disciples of this world on her own so that Yang Kai could suppress and seal the source piece in peace. Summoning the profound source gate, a slit cracked open from the gate. Within its suppressing and sealing territory, Mo's source piece poured out. As with all the times before it, the source piece seemed to be pulled by an inexplicable force towards the open gate. Yang Kai had witnessed this scene many times before and was not the least bit surprised. According to Mu, the profound source gate was a supreme treasure born alongside the universe, outside which the primordial light was born, and behind which the primordial darkness was nurtured. The primordial light was symbolic of all the brightness and wonderfulness of this universe. Not bound by the profound source gate, it left after its inception, but the darkness born within the profound source gate could not as easily escape. That was until the primordial darkness gained sentience of its own after accumulating for endless years. That was Mo. For Mo, the profound source gate had the natural power to suppress and seal it, which was why Mu hid the profound source gate in the primordial world. Only the profound source gate could suppress and seal Mo's source. Each of the previous attempts was uneventful. Once the profound source gate was summoned and opened up, the source piece would be drawn into it and sealed. But this time, things were not quite the same. Yang Kai could clearly sense Mo's source piece struggling violently, as if it had a consciousness of its own, trying to escape the pull of the profound source gate. However, it was still only a small piece of a whole, and in the end, it could not resist the profound source gate's power. As the source piece was about to pour through the gate, a pair of eyes suddenly opened in the darkness. The eyes were so indescribably black that they seemed to contain all the darkness in existence. Even Yang Kai could not help but feel a chill run through his body as they stared at him. Fortunately, it was just for a moment before the source piece disappeared into the gate, and the chilling sensation disappeared without a trace. We're reaching the limit. Yang Kai had a feeling. He had traveled through more than 2,000 worlds on his journey, and had managed to suppress and seal almost 1,000 pieces of Mo's source. Mu had divided Mo's source into 3,000 pieces and sealed them into 3,000 different universe worlds, and through his journey, Yang Kai managed to suppress and seal a lot of them despite all the twists and turns he encountered along his way. This amount was almost 30% of Mo's source pieces, which was already a very fruitful number. The more source pieces that were suppressed and sealed, the greater of an impact there would be on Mo. Even if Mo were to awaken completely at this moment, its strength would still drop drastically from its peak due to its compromised source. But it was still not enough. After all, Mo was said to be in the legendary creation realm. Without facing it directly, nobody could predict just how powerful it really was. Even without 30% of its sources, its remaining strength was still great enough that it was not something the current human race could contend with. Yang Kai was slightly relieved to have gotten some news about Zhang Ruoxi from Wu Kuang. Wu Kuang's thread of consciousness only had a faint connection to his true self outside, so his perception of things was not very clear, so not only did Yang Kai find his information to be unbelievable, but even Wu Kuang himself could not be sure. Regardless, he had to speed things up on his end. Before Mo awakened, he had to suppress and seal as many of the source pieces as possible, even if it was just one more. Senior. Yang Kai turned around and shouted as he withdrew the profound source gate. Hearing this, Mu, who was helping to ward off the countless Black Ink disciples, rushed to his side and raised her palm, gracefully patting downwards. Following that, amidst the furious roars of the many Black Ink disciples, Yang Kai's body turned into a stream of light and took off into the sky. In the primordial world, little 11th's illness was getting worse. His small body was as cold as ice one moment, and as hot as magma the next. At first, he was able to keep himself conscious, but by now, he was mostly asleep, and the time he could stay awake was getting shorter and shorter. As he slept, he was haunted by unceasing nightmares that caused him to shake and shiver constantly. Mu remained by his side, watching him carefully. When little 11th finally woke up and opened his eyes, he saw Mu sitting by his bedside, holding him gently. Mu seemed to have sensed his movements as she looked down at him, her eyes bloodshot. She had no idea how long it had been since she had properly rested. "You're awake." Mu opened her mouth, but her throat sounded very dry. Looking at the red blood vessels in Mu's eyes, little 11th's heart ached. A sour taste filled his mouth and even the corners of his eyes grew wet. He turned his head away and wiped the corners of his eyes with his hand, answering with a soft hum. Mu placed her hand on little 11th's forehead and felt it carefully for a moment before saying joyfully, "Your fever has gone down. How are you feeling now?" Little 11th was silent for a moment before saying, "Much better." Mu smiled and withdrew her hand, "Good. Get some more sleep and you should get better then." Little 11th opened his mouth, "Sixth sister, I don't want to sleep." He had slept enough already. "Then what do you want to do?" "I want some congee." The sister and brother, unrelated by blood, had been living together and relying on each other for survival in this bustling city. Mu had cooked many delicious foods for little 11th, but what he wanted most at this moment was the plain rice congee cooked by her. This was the first food he had eaten since waking up in this world. "Sure," Mu raised her hand and gave him an affectionate tickle on the nose before getting up. "In that case, wait here for a while." Little 11th fell silent. Very soon, the congee was ready. Mu brought in the pot of cooked congee and was just about to serve little 11th a bowl when she saw him get out of bed, sit by the table, and pull the pot closer to himself. Mu laughed, "You're planning to eat that much? Be careful or you'll spoil your tummy." Little 11th huffed, "I want to eat. It's not like my tummy is weak." Mu was helpless. Good, you can have it all. If you can't finish it, then you better watch out or I'll spank your bottom." Little 11th couldn't help but clench his butt a little and blushed, "I'm not a child anymore, stop spanking me for no reason." As soon as he finished speaking, Mu pressed on his nose with a finger, immediately creating a pig's nose on little 11th's face. Little 11th shook his head in annoyance and sniffled, "You're so childish. You're always doing these childish things." Mu covered her lips and giggled, but she stopped teasing him, instead handing over the wooden spoon she brought. Little 11th picked up the bowl and held the clay pot in his arms, digging into his meal. Mu sat by quietly, watching him, saying from time to time, "Eat slowly and be careful so you don't burn yourself. It's not like anyone is going to steal it from you." From time to time, she would help him wipe the corners of his mouth. The freshly cooked congee was so hot that little 11th kept sucking in his breath. Even his face had grown red and his head was steaming from the heat. It took about an hour, but he did manage to finish it eventually. Even the bottom of the pot was scraped clean without a drop left behind. Mu peered into the pot and joked, "If you ate nicely like that every time, I could save the effort of washing the dishes." Little 11th rubbed his round tummy and made a face at her, "Then won't you turn into a lazy woman? Be careful or you won't be able to get married in the future." Mu raised her hand and smacked him upside the head, "It's not up to you to say whether I can get married or not." Little 11th held his head with both hands and complained, "You're hitting me again, I'm still a patient." Mu raised her hand as if to strike him again, but in the end, she just stroked his head gently. Little 11th lowered his head. The atmosphere turned silent. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5975, Hello, we finally meet. In a humble house on the edge of Dawn City, a pair of sister and brother sat opposite each other. Only after a long time did little 11th speak. "Sixth sister, what's the matter? Let's talk after I've finished washing the dishes, all right?" Mu smiled, got up, and picked up the clay pot before walking out. Looking at her back, little 11th sighed, a sadness that did not match his age appearing on his small face. The dust-covered memories from long ago began to stir. In the boundless darkness, where not a trace of light could be seen, a consciousness began to emerge. At first, it was dull and incomplete, just fumbling through the infinite darkness by instinct. After an unknown period of time had passed, that consciousness slowly became complete, and as it did so, it gradually became aware of its surroundings. It was as if it was trapped in a strange place, a place of nihility and emptiness where time flowed endlessly, and that made it feel lonely. It began to consciously search for a way out so that it could escape from this place that was keeping it trapped, but it did not even know why it wanted to leave. All its thoughts and actions were purely based on its instinct. It took action, but to no avail, and after long years of suffering, it finally found a way out of that place. However, there was a tightly sealed gate blocking the way. It tried with all its might to break it down, but it was as if the strange gate had a complete suppressive power against it. No matter how hard it tried, it could not budge it in the slightest. Day after day, year after year, it gradually came to feel an emotion called despair. It understood that it was impossible for it to open the gate with its own power. Despair never came without reason, it only appeared when one's hopes were extinguished. For countless years it lived in this dark, lonely world, never understanding what despair meant, until the seed of hope was planted in it. Ironically, from the same gate it found. Countless years of hard work came to nothing in the end, and the ultimate decision to give up was overwhelmingly frustrating. Perhaps it was destined to live in this dark world forever, it thought. That was until one day, it suddenly heard some strange noises when it was sleeping peacefully behind the gate. Until then, it had never even known that such a thing as sound existed in this world. Where it lived, not only was there no light, there was not even a hint of sound. Complete and utter silence. It was awoken from its slumber and listened to the sweet sound of that voice. At that time, it had no idea what that voice was saying. It was not until later that it understood that the person was knocking softly at the gate, asking in a loud voice, "Is anyone there? Hello? Is anyone home?" The flames of hope were rekindled in the ashes of despair that had been tormenting it for countless years. It fought hard to make as much noise as possible from behind the gate, hoping that it could reach the outside. The person at the gate must have noticed it and said gleefully, "Ah, someone's home. Could you please open the gate?" But how could it? It would have done so already if it could. Moreover, it could not even understand what the person was saying at the time. All it could do was keep on making noise in order to make its presence known, praying in its heart that the owner of that voice would not leave no matter what. It had been alone for countless years, and even if it could never leave this desolate world, it was happy as long as the voice outside that gate would not fade away and if it could listen to it in silence. "Are you unable to get out?" The person at the gate began to ask again, seemingly having guessed its situation. The response was always some dull thumping sounds. "I understand now. You're trapped." It dawned on the person outside the gate. How pitiful. In that case, let me give you a hand. The next thing it felt was that the gate which had always remained still began to shake. It was taken aback, yet excited at the same time. But in the end, the gate still did not open. After a long time, that pleasant-sounding voice emerged from outside the gate again. "This gate seems to be an innate supreme treasure. I am not able to open it with my current strength, but I feel that I should be able to open it once I get stronger. Can you wait in there for a while longer? I'll go and cultivate, then come back to you later." It had no idea what the voice was saying. All it knew was that the person left after speaking those words. Its hopes were crushed yet again, and it continued to sink into this dead world, where the boundless despair that enveloped it also continued to make it stronger. It was not until many years later that the voice appeared once more. Overjoyed, it made some noise at the gate as soon as possible. Sure enough, the voice that had once appeared noticed its presence and spoke a few words to it, then fiddled with the gate for a while before leaving again for the second time. But this time, it no longer despaired. It vaguely understood what the person beyond the gate was trying to do, so even in the midst of the boundless world of desolation, it was full of hope and expectation. And so it waited, and waited. In the endless years that followed, in the long river of time that was far too long to trace back, the two powerful existences, one inside and one outside, gradually became acquainted and formed a relationship of tacit understanding with each other. And as the person outside was talking to themselves, it got to learn their language and could already begin to communicate with them in a simple way. For it, this was an exceptionally wonderful experience, and the dark world in which it lived was no longer as dreary because in the midst of that darkness was a heart filled with hope. It remembered vividly the conversation that took place between them, even when that person outside the gate arrived for the 7th time to try and let it out but failed. I've already cultivated into the peak of the 9th order, but how come this gate still won't open? How annoying! Annoying! It repeated, not so much frustrated as happy. Its greatest wish was no longer to open the gate and leave this place, but to have someone to accompany it outside the gate and talk to it. That alone was enough to satisfy it. Being able to hear her speak filled it with so much joy each time that it would roll around behind that gate for days on end. I have to figure out a way, but the 9th order should already be the upper limit of the open heaven realm. What must I do to break through even further above that? The person behind the gate sounded worried. There was nothing it could do to help in these circumstances. It did not even know what the 9th order was, or what the open heaven realm meant. This won't do, I have to go. The humans are currently in a bad situation since the great monsters are not easy to deal with, but rest assured, none of them are as powerful as I am. I'll come back for you once the situation stabilizes, maybe then I'll be able to open this gate and let you out. Hearing that person's words, it knew that she would be leaving again. Even though it was reluctant to part with her, it couldn't stop her. In the end, it could only give a stiff reminder, take care, be safe. I will. The person outside the gate answered gleefully. The final wait felt unbearably long, seemingly lasting much longer than the times before. So, it kept waiting at the gate, making some noise from time to time as if afraid that that person would not notice its presence when she arrived. Eventually, that person came. Listen, the world is such an amazing place. There's actually a thing called the universe furnace, and it appeared out of nowhere a few years ago, and I went inside. There was a really, really long river in there, and I have no idea where the source is or where it ends, so I call it the infinite river. What's a river? It asked. A river. It's hard to explain, but once you come out, you'll know if I bring you there. Besides the river, there were also big mountains. Oh, what else? Then, I emulated the infinite river and refined a long river of my own, but it was still a far cry from that infinite river. Still, I am now much stronger than before, and I have a very strong feeling that I will be able to open the gate this time. And so, it responded, you say that every time you come here, but then you fail every time. The person outside sounded disgruntled, wow, you've actually learned to insult me. That makes me mad. No, I wasn't trying to, it felt guilty and apologized in a panic. The person outside the gate giggled. The sound of her laughter sounded even better than before, I was just kidding. You're so gullible. After making sure that she wasn't really angry, it finally felt at ease. All right, I'm going to open the gate now, so stand back, or I might accidentally hurt you, said the person outside the gate. And so, it moved away from the gate as it was told, and the next thing it knew, the tightly closed gate began to rumble and shake even more violently than ever before. It was sure from this that the person on the other side had indeed increased their strength greatly and became much stronger than previously. This also helped to give it more confidence in that person, thinking that there might actually be hope of the gate opening this time. Hope came quickly, and with the violent movement outside, the gate that had been tightly shut all this time parted to either side, gradually revealing an opening. When the light from the outside pierced through the darkness, it couldn't help but lose itself for a moment, staring in awe at the light that it had never seen before with both mind and body trembling. So this was the legendary light. Even a being born in darkness like it had an innate yearning and thirst for such light. Just this ray of light taught it that the world outside was countless times more exciting than the place where it was born. "It won't open any more than this," the person outside the gate yelled in a strained voice. "This is the limit. Quickly, get into my space-time river, I'll pull you out." As soon as she spoke, a great river came tumbling through the opening, pouring into the endless darkness. It dared not hesitate and plunged headlong into the river. Immediately afterwards, it felt a mysterious force drawing it towards the opening in the gate. Almost at the very moment that it exited the opening, the gate that had been opened closed shut again. The space-time river, which she had yet to fully withdraw, was even cut off and part of it was left in the darkness forever. However, it was oblivious to such a thing happening. It was fighting its way up the river, and the moment that light filled its vision, it finally saw the figure that had been accompanying it outside the gate for countless years. There was a touch of crimson at the corner of that person's mouth. She wiped it away as if it were nothing. Grinning, she looked at the black blob that had floated out from her space-time river and greeted it with familiarity. "Hello. We meet at last. Sullivan, this just makes a mess of the whole story." So, it was not the 10 that found Mo. These two met beforehand. "Not sure how I can fix this equals okay. So, I went back and changed it in a way that made Mu hesitate to say what had happened. Since we have Tsang also telling the same story as Mu, let's just pretend that the 10 agreed upon this story so that Mu won't get blamed." Marshall Peak, Chapter 5976, Siblings. "Speaking of which, I haven't asked for your name yet." "My name is Mu, what's yours?" It would never forget their first meeting. There was a touch of red blood on the corners of her lips as this quiet and gentle woman stood in the void, looking at it with a smile on her face. "What is my name?" It had no idea what its name was. It did not even realize that such a thing as a name existed in this world. Before meeting her, its world was nothing more than endless darkness and desolation. It was because it met her that its world now had sound, had expectations, and today, light had also become a part of it. "I don't know what my name is," it mumbled in reply. Inexplicably, a lowly feeling of shame took root in it, as if it had blasphemed her just by looking at her like this. "No name, huh?" Mu walked around it, then she suddenly clapped her hands and smiled. "I know. Seeing as how you're so dark, your name should be Mo." "Mo," it murmured, and then it slowly beamed. "My name is Mo." It had its own name now, and it was Mu who gave it to it. It was determined not to lose it in its life, and one day, it would let everyone know its name. But soon, it realized that its appearance was not quite the same as Mu's. Mu had arms and legs, a head and a body, and she was even wearing pretty clothes. She was such a pretty person. It also wished that it. As those thoughts ran through its mind, the round black blob, without a fixed shape, began to warp, gradually transforming until it looked just like Mu. Mu looked at it in surprise. "You can even assume human form, but this won't do, you can't look like me." Mo was puzzled. "Why?" Mu kindly explained, "Because everyone is unique in this world." Mo didn't quite understand, but if Mu had said it, then it must be true. It was a shame that it couldn't look like her. She definitely had the most beautiful appearance in this world, it thought to itself. "Then, what should I look like?" Mo asked. "Just the way you were is good, too." After a pause, she added, "But if you have to assume human form, then why don't I give you a hand?" "With what?" Changing your appearance, Mu reached out her hands and pounced on it with a teasing grin on her face, then she began to rub and shape it. Mo did not resist, allowing her to do as she pleased. Mu worked for quite a while before taking a few steps back and studying Mo carefully, after which she nodded in satisfaction. There, that'll be your look. Mo held out its hands and spread them out in front of itself, feeling confused as it looked at its small hands. Seeing its confusion, Mu took the initiative to explain, "This is what my brother looked like, but he died when he was very young, so you can take his form from now on." "Okay," Mo responded obediently. Mu then looked up at the profound source gate again and rushed over to it with excitement. "This gate is a treasure. It ate a part of my space-time river, so I'll have to take it with me." She then turned to Mo, "This is the door to your home, do you still want it?" Mo waved his hand, "I don't want it, you can have it." Who would even want such a thing? Mu nodded, "In that case, I won't stand on ceremony." The space-time river was summoned again and wrapped itself around the strange gate. Perhaps because a piece of her space-time river was left inside the gate, this time, Mu was able to collect it with ease. "Let's go," Mu beckoned Mo and led him away into the distance. On the way, Mo asked the question that was on his mind, "Mu, what is death?" "Death. If a person dies, then we will never be able to see each other again, and that person will only live on in the memories of others." "What is a little brother?" "Well, it's a sibling born from one's parents." "Then, am I your little brother?" "Yes, you'll be my little brother from now on." "You're my little brother, too." "That's not right, I'm your big sister." "Sixth sister, to be exact." "What is a big sister?" A big sister is a sibling born from one's own parents. But isn't that what a little brother is? Hey, listen, a little brother should speak less because if he talks too much, his mouth will glue shut and he'll never be able to open it again. Shocked, Mo covered his mouth in a panic. "Mu, where did this little friend come from?" "This is the one I told you about, the one who was shut behind that strange gate." "You got him out of there?" A crowd of people surrounded Mu and Mo, their eyes filled with scrutiny and curiosity. Mo clung to the corner of Mu's clothes and hid behind her. It had never known that so many people existed in this world, and that they all looked different. It was no wonder why Mu said that everyone was unique. "Little friend, what's your name?" someone asked. Mo shook his head and did not answer, a timid look on his face. The speaker asked with pity in his voice, "Is he mute?" Mu laughed, "Of course not, the child is just a little shy. There is something odd about this boy. I've never seen that power inside his body before." "Mu, do you know what you've rescued?" "I'm not sure, but it was too pitiful to see him trapped behind that gate all alone. I couldn't just leave him after I discovered him. I just hope you know what you're doing. Rest assured. With how weak he is, he can't do much even if the power inside his body is a little strange. I'll keep an eye on him." "That's good. Right now, the great monsters are running amok and our people are in a tough spot. We can't afford to deal with any more trouble." It was Mo's first time meeting someone other than Mu, and after a brief conversation with them, he was led off to rest by Mu. In the days that followed, they slowly came to know each other better and it became clear that Mo was no mute. Mo had also figured out the relationship between these people and Mu. The 10 of them had such a close bond that they called each other siblings. Mu was ranked 6th out of the 10, which was why Mu asked him to call her 6th sister on the way here. As he was the youngest, he was affectionately called Little 11th by everyone. Mo also finally figured out what a big sister and little brother was. It even witnessed death. In those days, the great monsters of the early ancient era were committing atrocities all across the land, and the human race chose to stand up to them, thus everything under the heavens was put under a constant baptism of blood and war. It was not known just how many humans had thrown away their lives in those battles. For a being who had been locked behind a gate all this while, it was a great shock for Mo to suddenly see such an unimaginable scene. Because of Mu, it began to think of itself as a human, and as it watched Mu and the 9 others busying about, it too wanted to help. It wanted to kill those early ancient era great monsters and give the humans a peaceful place to live. Mo began cultivating, but the human race's open heaven realm method did not suit it at all, and no matter how hard it tried, it could not raise its cultivation. That was until one day it unwittingly felt the power surging deep inside the bodies of some of the humans, and almost instinctively, it drew that invisible and formless power into its body, refining and absorbing it. It actually felt as if it had grown a little stronger. Mo was both pleasantly surprised and horribly terrified by this discovery. It was pleasantly surprised to have found a way to cultivate, but also terrified because it had never heard of this kind of cultivation before. It went to look for Mu at once to ask for clarification, however, Mu was out fighting at that time. By the time she returned, it was several dozen years later, and Mo had grown significantly stronger. Mo could not forget the joy on Mu's face, how happy she was that it became stronger. The words that reached its mouth were stuck there, but Mo suddenly realized that this was not so bad. As long as Mu was happy, what else mattered? Having found the right path to cultivate, Mo's strength soared by leaps and bounds. One day, it would finally become strong enough to step onto the battlefield. Mu did not give it any preferential treatment just because of who it was, and Mo simply participated in its first battle against monster race as the most ordinary of human soldiers. After all, Mu was one of the 10 commanders of the human race of that era and had more important things to do than babysit. It was impossible to keep Mo by her side and watch over it at all times. During Mo's first battle, the army that it was in was ambushed by the early ancient era's great monsters and torn to pieces. The casualties they suffered were severe. Mu rushed to provide support when she received the news, but by the time she reached the battlefield, the fighting was over. Originally, she thought that Mo was already no more, but what she saw instead stunned her. The human race, which had been at an absolute disadvantage in terms of military strength, had won the battle at a huge cost, with just 30% of their forces surviving in the end. Mo stood in the middle of the bloody sea of corpses, with many of the early ancient era great monsters nearby bowing down in submission as the cheers of the surviving soldiers came like a tide. It was only after this that Mu learnt that Mo had used its power at the most critical moment, causing monster race masters to change sides, leading to their eventual victory. It was only now that she realized the special nature of black ink strength, which seemed to have the ability to twist the mind and spirit of living beings. Mo had no choice but to confess to Mu about its years of cultivation, and that subduing monster race masters with its power was just an idea that happened to crop up. It had never done it before. For the first time, Mu reprimanded him. Mo panicked, not knowing what it had done wrong, but seeing Mu's reaction, it knew it had to have done something wrong. After scolding Mo, Mu couldn't help but sigh, saying that it wasn't its fault before leaving with a grimace. As it watched Mu's somewhat sullen back, Mo vowed to itself that it would never use that method of cultivation again, nor would it ever use its power to subdue any living creature. However, things rarely went as one wished in life. As the battle between the humans and monster race raged on, the fighting only became more and more fierce. Even if the human race had the 10 martial ancestors, the early ancient era great monsters had a considerable number of powerful masters of their own. Things were looking increasingly dire for the human race, and there were even many who had submitted to the monster race, willingly becoming their slaves in order to survive. Battle after battle, Mo, who had witnessed countless deaths, could no longer resist the urge to use its power once more, twisting the hearts of the humans who turned against them. Not one person on the entire battlefield was spared during that event. Even those of the monster race were subjugated by it. In that battle, the human race army, which had not seen glory for a long time, received an overwhelming victory. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5977, The Right to Live. Once the darkness was unleashed, it was difficult to seal it up again. While the 10 martial ancestors were fighting against the early ancient era great monsters at the forefront of the battlefield, Missouri subordinated batch after batch of helpers, leading the human race at the back and obtaining victory in every battle. As time passed, it became stronger and stronger. Mo had achieved what it vowed to do back then, to spread its name and make itself known to all of the humans. There was not much that it wanted from this. Mo just wished to end this war as soon as possible, then Mu would have more time to accompany it again. It was willing to use any means to achieve that goal, bestowing great power on the humans who feared and avoided the war so that they could become fearless. It even began to spread its power to the various universe worlds so that those people could become strong as quickly as possible. All its hard work and dedication had been worthwhile. Mu and the other 10 martial ancestors slayed many of the early ancient era great monsters at the battlefront, achieving a full victory. Meanwhile, the human race army that Mo led was also very successful on each battlefield. The living space for monster race was constantly being shrunk. The human race was about to usher in their final victory. Mo was overjoyed to see Mu again, whom it had not been able to see for many years. With great excitement, it told her about his efforts and achievements over the years, not noticing the troubled look in Mu's eyes. Mo made a wish in front of Mu, that they would never have to be separated again once the war was over. Rubbing its head, Mu agreed. From then on, Mu would bring Mo along wherever she went. Mo was no longer allowed to use the power it had used before, and it was no longer allowed to set foot on the battlefield, but it did not care. Compared to being extolled by countless humans and bending the disobedient ones to its will, Mo preferred simply staying quietly by Mu's side. The war finally came to an end and the human race emerged as the final victors, becoming the masters of the universe while the early ancient era great monsters were almost slaughtered to extinction. Even though there were still great monsters left, it was no longer possible for them to stir up any waves. Mu took Mo on a journey to witness the beauty and peace of the universe, acting like true brother and sister. During that journey, Mu showered it with nothing but care. Mo felt that even if it died at that time, it would have no regrets. Many years later, Mo would ask itself many times why it really didn't die in that beautiful memory, because its life would have been perfect if that was the case. One day, Mu said she would bring it home, to visit the place where it was born. Though it was reluctant to return to that place that had trapped it for so many years, Mo could not deny her since it was Mu who requested it. The two of them traveled together, returning to that ancient land. The other 9 big brothers had already arrived and were waiting for them. After Mu led Mo there, it keenly sensed a massive array being activated, sealing the void in all directions. Mo did not understand what was going on. Until Mu told him the truth. Mo never would have thought that Mu would one day trick it like this. Shock, anger, resentment, all sorts of complicated emotions overwhelmed it. The reason Mu led it here was just so they could suppress and seal it here again, and that last journey would be its final fond experiences. Mo's heart felt as if it had been stabbed. The dependence and trust it once had turned into grief, causing Mo to lose its rationale for a moment. The power that had been built up over the years was released, and Mo's mind became completely twisted. Under Mo's influence, all the beings previously corrupted by his power were turned into slaves. The human race, which had only been at peace for a few years, was once again thrust into an endless war. Inside the small house, Mo sighed faintly as its small figure grew rapidly, transforming into a handsome young man with delicate features in the blink of an eye. He got up, walked out of the house, and looked up at the sky, his gaze absent as his mind drifted. Such an innocent memory from so long ago. Mu came out of the kitchen, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked at him with a faint smile. Are you leaving? Mo turned his head and looked at Mu with a complicated gaze before nodding gently. Mu said to him, all these years, it was Sixth Sister who wronged you. Mo raised his hand to interrupt her, smiling back, you did the right thing, Sixth Sister. Huh? Mu cocked her head at it in confusion. Mo said, I was too young then, mistakenly believing that I had full control of that power, but it proved to be too much for me to grasp. If you hadn't suppressed and sealed me back then, I'm afraid the human race would be no more. Mu was stunned for a moment, then as if understanding something, her face paled slightly. You mean, Mo sighed, that power is the root, I am only its consciousness that has been born through many long years of accumulation. Even though you have taught me about all the wonderful things in the universe, in the end, not everything is good in this world. No matter the kind of consciousness it birthed, its power will continue to grow, and one day even that consciousness will become its slave. When that happens, only one instinct will remain, to conquer and enslave everything. Just as the birth of the black ink cult was inevitable in this world, so too was all this predestined. Hearing those words from it, Mu finally understood, so, when the power was suppressed and sealed once more, it instead led you to rediscover yourself. Exactly, Mo grinned. Then now, Mo shook its head, it will all return soon. Sixth sister, you have already fulfilled your promise. For that, I thank you. Mo looked up at Mu, tears faintly welling in his eyes. Mu promised back then that she would accompany him forever and keep him by her side wherever she went, and she had done exactly that and more. While she was alive, she was constantly watching over the primordial heaven's source grand restriction, and even in her death, the shadows she left behind continued to keep Mo company. Mu tried to make one last effort, if you like, we could go on like this. Mo shook his head sadly, I can't stop it, and besides, since I was born, I, too, should fight for my right to live. These words caused Mu's heart to clench. Every living being had the right to live since birth, to pursue the good things in life, but what if the existence of this being was in itself, a sin? Mo looked at Mu with a deep gaze, as if he wanted to brand the figure before him into the deepest part of his mind, into his life, never to be forgotten. He then murmured softly, besides, a world without sixth sister, no longer needs to exist. Mo opened his arms as if to embrace the entire world. Winds rose and clouds surged. A black ray of light suddenly descended and entered Mo's body, causing his aura to swell explosively. This was followed by a second, then a third. All the inhabitants of Dawn City looked up in shock, only to see an endless stream of black light coming from nowhere in the sky, falling incessantly towards a certain spot in the city where a terrifying aura was surging. The inside of the holy temple of the light spirit religion was a chaotic mess. The Order Lords wanted to go and find out what was going on, but they could barely even move their bodies when they felt that terrible power. Everyone's eyes were filled with horror. The turbulent wind blew the small house down, but Mu stood still, completely untouched as Mo had enveloped her in a force that was protecting her. In the 2639th world, Yang Kai managed to repel the attacking Black Ink disciples together with Mu's shadow, but not without difficulty. Just as he was about to use the profound source gate to suppress and seal Mo's source piece, the seal opened by itself before he could even act, and the piece inside turned into a black light that rushed into the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. This, Yang Kai looked on in astonishment at what had just happened. Mu's shadow paled and she raised her hand, pressing her palm against Yang Kai's chest before urging, he has woken up. Quickly go to the primordial world, that is the source of my power. Find the shadow I left there and she will tell you what to do. Mo has awakened. Despite knowing that this would happen, Yang Kai could not help but feel his chest tightening when the time finally came. Was it finally time to face the strongest existence in this universe? Yang Kai then silently comforted himself. Somewhere between 30% and 40% of Mo's source should be suppressed and sealed, so in other words, its black ink strength had also been weakened by that much. Even so, was there anyone among them who could be a match for Mo? If there was no way to defeat Mo, then all their previous efforts would be in vain. It was too late to ask any more questions though, so under the pull of Mu's power, he disappeared in a flash of light. By this time, the battle outside the primordial heaven's source grand restriction had subsided. Zhang Ruoxi had arrived, bringing with her not only the 8th Ninth Order small stone race personal guard, but also a large army of hundreds of millions from the small stone race soldiers. The Black Ink clan at the opening of the grand restriction no longer dared to come out to fight, so how could the ones left outside be any match for the humans? The small stone race regiments cut through the battlefield one by one, firstly dividing the Black Ink clan army before gradually pecking away at their forces. With the two giant spirit gods rampaging through the battlefield, the Black Ink clan army was soon decimated. If this were the past, then the Black Ink clan army might have fled if they were being so steeply suppressed. But this place was the primordial heaven's source grand restriction, where the source of the Black Ink clan was, so where could they flee to? If they fought with their lives on the line, they could at least weaken the enemy and take some pressure off those still inside the grand restriction. With this consideration in mind, the only end for those outside the grand restriction was death. The human race soldiers who were still recuperating watched this scene from afar with mixed feelings. What should have been a certain defeat had been turned around by the small stone race army, but this victory did not dictate the final outcome. It may take an even more grueling and brutal battle to actually win this war. Gotcha! Suddenly, a strange sound came from the void. Before the human race masters could figure out what was happening, they heard Wuquang's grave voice call out, "Watch out! The grand restriction is about to break." Gotcha! The sound began to overlap more and more. The human race army stopped for a moment before immediately getting into formation. As countless pairs of eyes watched on, cracks appeared in the endless darkness of the void, the lines becoming as dense as a spider web in the blink of an eye. A figure had also emerged from somewhere in the grand restriction, hurriedly moving towards the human race army. It was Wuquang, who had been standing guard at the grand restriction for thousands of years. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5978, The Way Forward. As the primordial heaven's source grand restriction was about to break, it was pointless for Wuquang to stay connected to it any longer. In fact, he would even have to suffer the backlash if he remained. So, the moment he realized that the situation was irreversible, he left the grand restriction as soon as possible. With this, he could at least ensure that he would not be injured. As for Yang Kai, who still remained inside, he was no longer able to provide much help to him regardless. What caught the attention of the many Ninth Order masters, however, was the aura that Wuquang was displaying at this moment. Wuquang's existence was known only to a few human race masters. They knew that he was sent here by Yang Kai to guard the primordial heaven's source grand restriction, but no one knows how strong he was, not even Yang Kai. After all, when he sent Wuquang here, he was only in the 7th Order open heaven realm. Even though he later broke through to the 8th Order and then the 9th Order, no one had any close contact with him, so they could only speculate on his strength. At this moment, Wuquang's strength was finally revealed to the world. He was at the peak of the 9th Order. He was even stronger when compared to Xiao Xiao and Wuqing, the oldest veteran masters of the human race. In the situation they were facing, having another peak 9th Order master would be of great help. However, something unexpected happened before the humans could even rejoice. Wuquang's departure from the grand restriction sped up its destruction. Even more cracks appeared, and soon, the primordial heaven's source grand restriction, which had persisted for millions of years, shattered like a broken mirror. Glowing dots of light filled the void, and as the light dissipated, boundless black filled one's vision. The blackness seemed to possess a life of its own, writhing and rolling as the auras of an uncountable number of beings could be felt inside of it. Before the grand restriction broke, the Black Ink clan could only leave through that one opening, so even at the height of the Human Crusade Forces crisis, not too many Black Ink clan reinforcements could get out at once. This allowed them to maintain a degree of control over the situation. But now, things have changed. With the complete destruction of the Grand Restriction, all of the Black Ink clansmen hiding inside of it were instantly released. No one had any idea just how many Black Ink clansmen were still hidden in that abyss of darkness. The only thing that the humans could feel glad about was the fact that they had killed many of the Black Ink clan masters before, which relieved some of the pressure they had to face at this moment. The human race army waited with bated breath, but to their surprise, not a single Black Ink clansman emerged from the sea of Black Ink strength even after some time had passed. They seemed to be fearful of something. Soon, the human race masters realized what it was. It was Zhang Ruoxi that the Black Ink clan was afraid of. The power she had shown earlier was beyond comprehension, surpassing even that of the giant spirit gods, allowing her to kill royal lords like she was cutting melons or chopping vegetables. At the moment, Zhang Ruoxi stood at the very forefront of the small stone race army. Despite standing alone, her presence was still intimidating enough that the Black Ink clan did not dare to move rashly. Even though the white wings spread behind her back were small in the face of the darkness that covered everything the eye could see, the light emitting from her was far too bright for any darkness to truly cover. The Ninth Order masters could not help but feel a little embarrassed at this. If Zhang Ruoxi had not soared across the skies to their aid, their second crusade would have already failed. If that were to be the case, then they would have no choice but to retreat through the path that Yang Kai had prepared for them, to follow him to seek a new life in a new world. But who would know what that new world would be like? In front of the massive enemy army, Zhang Ruoxi remained calm and steady. On the other hand, in the void before her, the Black Ink strength surged. The Black Ink clan were too terrified to even move. The power of a single person could actually be so terrifying. All of a sudden, Zhang Ruoxi's expression changed. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she stared into the depths of the black abyss. Seemingly noticing something, her wings flapped behind her and she turned into a stream of white light, instantly disappearing into the sea of darkness. From afar, a voice reached me. Jing Luan's ears. "Sir is inside, I'll go and check on him." In an instant, the Black Ink ocean became even more agitated. It was clear that Zhang Ruoxi was not merely going over to check out the situation. Inside the void that was filled with all the Black Ink clansmen, she couldn't reach Yang Kai without cutting a bloody path through them. In the primordial world, the aftermath of the chaos in Dawn City was still lingering. Just now, everyone saw a figure at the edge of the city soaring into the skies before disappearing without a trace, and after that person disappeared, the black lights that fell from the sky also disappeared. Even though the unusual phenomenon was gone, the panic it caused would not ease for some time. The Saintess and Li Fei Yu looked in that direction together, a pondering look in their eyes. They knew that the first Saintess lived in seclusion at that location, and they had a sneaking suspicion that what they saw was related to her. Shortly after Mo departed, Yang Kai returned to this place, drawn by the power of Mu's shadow. The first thing he saw was Mu, who was standing in front of the small house. "Senior!" Yang Kai shouted. Mu turned to look in his direction, seemingly expecting him. "You're here. Where's little 11th? Yang Kai looked around, though he had a vague guess when he did not see his small figure around. "Sure enough," Mu replied, "he has awakened, and the sealed source pieces have all returned one after the other. This universe world cannot withstand his power, but he was unwilling to destroy it, so he has left my space-time river already." Yang Kai nodded lightly. "I understand. The final battle was upon him, and he had done all that he could. Whether they won or lost would depend on the final fight. Senior, since Mo has awakened, it is time for me to go. The power that the human race has at this time may not be enough to hold him back, but we will do our best. The last shadow of yours I met told me to come back and see you, and that you would show me the way forward, so I hope that Senior can enlighten me." "You have already found your way forward." Mu looked at him with a smile in her gaze. "Huh?" Yang Kai did not understand. "You've chosen the same path that I have," Mu added. Yang Kai was thoughtful, condensing 10,000 grand daos in one's own body and manifesting the spacetime river. Mu nodded lightly. "As I told you before, everyone has their own spacetime river, which starts flowing from the day they are born and ends at the day they die. However, since the start of time, few have been able to manifest their spacetime river. I was the first, while you are the second." Saying so, she suddenly asked Yang Kai a question. "The open heaven realm method cultivated by the human race is flawed. You must have noticed, yes?" Yang Kai nodded. "The Ninth Order is the limit of the open heaven realm method, but I had a vague feeling that the Ninth Order open heaven realm is not the end of martial Tao. There should be a higher realm above the ninth order, above the open heaven realm. There is indeed a higher realm above the ninth order, Mu gave him an affirmative answer. Yang Kai was astonished. Has Senior reached it? Embarrassedly, Mu shook her head. If I had reached it, the human race would not be in this predicament today. Even though I have not reached it, I did touch upon it. Yang Kai could not help but praise her in his heart, as expected of the strongest among the martial ancestors. Sun told him back then that the martial ancestors were still only in the ninth order, but they were stronger as they had gone further along the path. It was just that they had still yet to leave the bounds of the open heaven realm. However, Mu told him today that she had touched the profound realm above the open heaven realm. Even if she had only touched it and not reached it, it was still an extraordinary achievement. Mu recalled an old memory and slowly began. The open heaven realm method was born out of necessity at a time when the human race was in a difficult situation. The early ancient era great monsters were rampaging throughout the universe, and without the open heaven realm method, the human race would have been nothing but food and slaves for them. During that time, the heavens were quietly beginning to favor the human race, so it devised a way out for them, the open heaven realm method. Only with it can the human race give rise to a constant stream of masters, which gave them the capital to contend with the early ancient era great monsters. However, even the heavens have their selfishness. For example, the primordial world. Once one's cultivation surpasses the immortal ascension realm, they would receive its repulsion and hostility, that is the selfishness of the primordial world. One can also see it as its instinct for self-preservation. The universe is not unchanging as its blessings were first concentrated on the divine spirits before moving to the early ancient era monster race, then finally to us, the human race. Over time, the three races became the favored of the heavens and were given the right to dominate all beneath it. She turned to Yang Kai. Why do you think this happened? Yang Kai pondered for a moment. If one race becomes too powerful, then they are no longer fearful of the heavens, and once the power they hold becomes strong enough to oppose it, it creates a sense of crisis in the heavens. Hence, there will be a transfer of its blessing. He had considered such a thing before, so he was able to give a quick answer to Mu's question. Mu nodded. Precisely. The universe lives, and it has its own will. Principles are a part of its will, but it is not the same as us living beings. It is above us as all beings are under its will. If any power that surpasses its control were to come to be, it would move to remedy the situation, but it does not take action itself, and it certainly does not have the power to do so. So, it uses the power of other beings to restore order from chaos and ensure that everything remains on the predetermined path. This is reflected in history from long ago, when the early ancient era monster race overthrew the divine spirits, and when the human race freed itself from the slavery of the early ancient era monster race. But Senior, what does this have to do with my path? Yang Kai looked perplexed. Mu continued, naturally it is all related. Because the open heaven realm method was a gift willed by the heavens, it is also a kind of shackle. It is impossible to break free from these shackles of the open heaven realm method by using the open heaven realm method. In fact, there is only one place in existence that the heavens will cannot cover, and everything that happens and is obtained there is not under the control of the heavens. Yang Kai's eyes lit up and he blurted out, the universe furnace. He could just about understand what Mu was getting at now. I've never understood what the universe furnace is, but it is definitely a place beyond the heavens' influence, Mu asserted. Yang Kai thought to himself, of course the heavens can't interfere with it, because the universe itself was created inside the universe furnace. It could even be considered the origin of the heavens. He had coincidentally seen the true face of the universe furnace and witnessed the process of it taking in chaos and splitting heaven and earth apart. He wanted to discuss all this with Mu, but time was running out and he could not figure out a way to explain everything in a timely manner, so he had no choice but to endure the urge for now. You and I have ventured into the universe furnace, and we have seen the infinite river that flows through it, which led to us condensing our own spacetime rivers. Mu turned to Yang Kai. The spacetime river is your path forward. You're tuning into the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.